My husband, George, got my friend Rachel pregnant. Why are you looking at me like that? Rachel asked. It's your fault that you're infertile, she said to me. If you want money from me, I can give you $20,000. Will that be enough? Don't come after me just because you're lonely. That would be really annoying. Sorry I took George away from you. We're going to be happy now. You should congratulate us. Rachel smiled and patted her growing belly. As I looked at her big belly, I thought, something doesn't feel right. After thinking for a while, I said, I get it now. What's going on with you? Rachel asked. I smiled to myself because I realized what was really happening. My name is Diana. I live with my husband, George, in a rental apartment. We met at my old job. Even though we worked in different departments, we ended up sitting next to each other at a company party. George is kind and friendly, so I liked him, and he liked me back. We started dating, had some arguments, but after 2 years, we got married. We've been married for 3 years now, but we don't have kids. It's not that we don't want children. We both love the idea of having kids. We talked about it a lot, and we both wanted to start a family. I quit my job to become a housewife, but we still couldn't get pregnant. I knew that having a baby isn't always easy, but it was hard for me when I couldn't get pregnant after trying. It started to wear me down emotionally. On top of that, my mother-in-law, Emily, lives nearby. She would show up at my house uninvited every day, pressuring me to have children. At first, I thought she was a caring mother-in-law, but over time, she became very pushy about me getting pregnant. She would also take my things without asking, complain about the meals I made, and criticize me all the time. One day, she took all my jewelry, bags, and clothes, saying she was helping me clean up. Emily, those are my things. I'm still using them, so please don't take them without asking. What are you talking about? You don't even do your duties as a wife. Aren't you ashamed of buying all these fancy things? I'll use them for you, so be thankful. I feel sorry for George. He was tricked into marrying someone like you. You can't get pregnant, so you're not a good wife. Just leave him and get out of our lives. No matter what I said, Emily wouldn't listen. George didn't stop her and even seemed to agree with her. I wasn't just sitting around doing nothing while they pressured me. I saw a doctor multiple times, and there was nothing wrong with me. I thought maybe something was wrong with George, but he refused to get tested. He believed what his mom said, that infertility was a woman's problem, so things didn't improve. Then, one day, George came home looking serious and told me to sit down. Diana, I need to tell you something. Please listen to me. Why are you acting like this all of a sudden? I was going to make dinner. Does it have to be now? He stopped me before I could head to the kitchen, and he made me sit on the couch. He sat on the floor across from me. After a few seconds of silence, he spoke. Actually, Rachel is pregnant. Please break up with me. If you want money, I can give you $20,000. I'm sure you'll understand. Diana, I've always wanted a child, and like my mom said, I don't want a wife who can't have kids. I couldn't understand what he was saying. All I could say was, huh? I was so shocked, and George repeated himself. So, I'm going to have a baby with Rachel, because you couldn't get pregnant. I feel bad about having a baby with someone else while we're still married, but it is what it is. I'll give you alimony, but you have to know it's all your fault. Diana, if you had gotten pregnant, none of this would have happened. No matter how many times he said it, I couldn't understand what was going on. Is he really an adult? Where did the gentle George the first fell in love with go? I had a headache from everything he was saying, and I finally asked the one question that was bothering me the most. Who's the other girl? How long has this been going on? I asked, feeling confused and hurt. It's Rachel. You know her. She was your old coworker. When I told her you were having trouble getting pregnant, she offered to help. George answered casually, without showing any emotion. Rachel and I started at the company at the same time, and we got along well. She even came to our wedding, and it was Rachel who encouraged me to date you when I wasn't sure if I should, he continued. I was overwhelmed by the betrayal, feeling like everything was falling apart. The doctor said Rachel's having a boy. I'm so excited. I can't wait to play catch and go camping with him when he's older. This is my dream coming true, George said happily, ignoring how hurt I was. Does your mom know about this? I asked, still in shock. He nodded. Of course, I already told her. She's so happy to finally have a grandchild. I'm also getting ready to move in with Rachel. Once you and I divorce, we're moving in together. It seemed like they were already planning as if I would just agree to the divorce. Just then, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but George hurried to answer it, saying, "Oh, she's here." When he came back, Rachel was right behind him. Rachel was holding onto George's arm, smiling and laughing. "Sorry, Diana, for getting pregnant. George really wanted a child, so I decided to help him. I heard from George that you can't get pregnant, right? Well, that's not your fault, but it's your problem, Diana." Rachel said this while lovingly patting her big belly. "Are you sure the baby in your belly is really George's?" I asked, feeling suspicious. Rachel's nostrils flared as she responded loudly, "Of course, yes, this baby is mine and George's. Don't be sarcastic just because you couldn't get pregnant." Rachel seemed a little uneasy as she said this, but she quickly added, "Yes, it's George's and my baby." "I can't believe you even doubted me," she added. I thought to myself, if that's how it is, then I'll accept the divorce. So, I hired a lawyer and filed for alimony from both of them. Thanks to the lawyer, I was able to get over $20,000 in alimony, and the divorce was finalized quickly. I decided to move back to my parents' house, because I didn't want to be near George and his family. I was confident that the truth would come out soon. A year passed. I found a job after moving back to my parents' house and started living a peaceful life. Over time, I stopped thinking about all the terrible things that happened. One day, I got home from work around 7 p.m. and saw someone hanging around in front of my house. Who could it be? I wondered. As I got closer, they noticed me and called out to me. "Oh, Diana, where were you? I've been waiting for you." It was George and his mother, looking suspicious. They had come without any notice and seemed like they were causing trouble. "What are you two doing here? We're divorced, so we don't have anything to do with each other anymore." I tried to get past them to go inside, but they grabbed my arm to stop me. "What's with your attitude? We came all the way here, so I'm not leaving until you listen to me." George started telling me what happened after the divorce. He complained a lot, but to sum it up, he said Rachel had deceived him. At first, Rachel had been helpful to George and his mother, doing housework and taking care of Emily, but after the baby was born, Rachel changed. She stopped helping with the housework, started shopping online all day, and only took care of the baby when she felt like it. Then there was a problem with the baby. The child didn't look like George at all. Emily got suspicious and secretly had a DNA test done, and it turned out the baby wasn't George's. When George asked Rachel about it, she took the baby and left the next night. I understand what happened, but what does that have to do with me? You said I'm an unfit wife because I couldn't get pregnant, right? I said. Are you still thinking about that? Let's start over. Mom's getting older and it's hard for her to do everything. I quit my job and only work part-time, so we're struggling financially. We're divorced, but we were once a family, so let's help each other out, George said. Apparently, when we got divorced, I had sent a letter to his company about what happened, and it caused rumors, which led to him leaving his job. So now, these two were trying to get me to support them financially. I was shocked and silent, but Emily took advantage of the situation and spoke up. If you're back at your parents' house, you haven't remarried, have you? No one will marry someone like you, except for my son George. Now, pack your things and come with us. It was clear that Emily still thought I was unfit as a wife and was trying to take advantage of me. I thought, it's time to end this. I see, so that's what happened. But wait, you haven't apologized to me. If you get down on your knees and apologize, maybe I'll think about getting back together, I said. George and Emily were both surprised. Emily yelled, "Why should I apologize to you?" But George stopped her. He seemed to realize that this time, he should apologize. He pulled Emily's arm, knelt down, and bowed his head. Emily reluctantly followed and knelt down too. "I'm sorry, please come back. Let's start over. I'm sorry for saying awful things," George said, looking up at me. "Okay, both of you can look up now." They both thought I was going to get back together with George, and Emily smiled when she saw me agreeing. "Well then, let's get back together," George said, but I crossed my arms and pretended to think about it. I've thought about it, but I still don't want to get back with you. It's too bad you both had to apologize to the person you looked down on. You two should just stay together. That's what you deserve, I said. George and Emily were shocked. Their faces turned bright red with embarrassment and anger. I can't believe you tricked us," Emily shouted. "Enough, you're the ones who've done enough. No matter what you say, I'm not getting back with you," I replied, and Emily stepped back, looking scared. Just then, 2 police officers arrived. Apparently, a neighbor saw me being harassed and called them. George and Emily tried to explain, but in the end, they were taken away by the police. After that, they never came to my parents' house again. Rumors said that Rachel's whereabouts were unknown, and George and Emily were struggling financially because they had to pay for the things Rachel bought with George's credit card. They sold their house and were living on George's low-paying job and Emily's part-time work. I later found out where Rachel was. A former co-worker of mine saw Rachel in town. She looked tired, and her face was drawn. She was pushing her son in a stroller with large luggage. I didn't care what happened to Rachel, but I hoped her child was okay. George called me once, and I answered, following my lawyer's advice to not block his calls. "Oh, Diana, it's been a long time. I wanted to tell you something," he said. "We have nothing to talk about anymore," I replied. "Actually, I went to the clinic, and I found out that the reason you couldn't get pregnant was because something was wrong with me. I'm sorry for believing my mom instead of you. I was so stupid. I'm truly sorry," he said. "Even if you understand now, it's too late. Don't contact me again," I told him before hanging up. I wanted George to regret what he'd done to me for the rest of his life. It felt like everything was finally over. After that, I started dating a colleague at work. I told him I was divorced, and he didn't mind at all. We kept dating, and recently, he proposed to me. Of course, I said yes, and he had to transfer for work, so I moved with him to a distant town. This helped me cut ties with George and Emily for good. Now, I'm pregnant with our long-awaited child. Just as my doctor had said, there was nothing wrong with me. My husband is so happy, and he promised to take care of me and our child forever. I want to take care of my child and my husband forever. I'm excited for the happy life ahead of us.
"Hello, Nancy," the older woman greeted warmly. "Hello, Mrs. Arrington." Nancy nodded in reply. "It's so hot today. Do you always sell here? I think it would be better in the shade." "Well, this spot is good. It's near the bus stop, so more people come by," Nancy responded with a smile. "Well, give me a litre jar then." The young woman adjusted her white headscarf, which concealed her long curly hair, and stooped behind the makeshift counter where she was selling homemade milk. Nancy had the look of a true villager, strong, sturdy, with a robust posture. Her slightly rough skin was tanned, but it didn't detract from her appearance. On the opposite, it added a simple charm. "You're as busy as a bee," Mrs. Harrington exclaimed. "I have to be. My mother is ill and I'm raising my son alone. We all need money these days. No one will feed us for free." "Yes, we all miss your Tom. He was a good man. It's a shame he died so young and left you alone," the elderly woman said sympathetically. Nancy gazed downward, her lower lip caught between her teeth in sadness. The sharp sting of loss had faded over the years, but the memories of her husband, a casualty at his workplace, still haunted her. "He was such a great forest man. He knew every twig in the forest and never let the poachers off the hook. He was constantly chasing them." "That's why they killed him," Nancy whispered. "How cruel they were! A gunshot to his back? How could anyone murder over some worthless fur? It's all because of this hunting business." "The worst part is that they never caught his murderer. The case was either silenced or there was no evidence." "It's all bribes from those villains." Mrs. Arrington dismissed her with a wave of her hand. "Our new gamekeeper, curse him! He is much more compliant than Tom. He avoids disputes with poachers, and look at him now, living a good life. Where does he get his money? He must be making a fortune." "Yes, it's impossible to earn that much by honest labour in our neck of the woods," Nancy replied with a sad grin. "Our district isn't that wealthy. I work on a farm, and even then it's not enough. I had to get my own cow and sell milk on the highway during weekends. That's how we make ends meet." "You poor thing. Why did such a good person end up with such a difficult life?" Mrs. Arrington shook her head sympathetically. "Well, I must get going. I have things to do at home, and I should put the milk in the fridge before it sours in the heat." "Goodbye," Nancy waved. She waited until Mrs. Arrington was out of sight before sinking heavily into her chair. The only customer in an hour was an acquaintance. Business was slow today, and the intense heat wasn't helping. "Phew, it's so hot. I can hardly breathe," Nancy said, touching her kerchief. "And there's nobody around. If something were to happen, there would be no one to help." Suddenly, her vision blurred. Nancy tried to stand, but her legs gave way, and she collapsed by the roadside, unconscious. "Should we call an ambulance?" a male voice called out from somewhere. Nancy tried carefully to open her eyes, wondering how much time had passed since she fell. She was roused by someone gently slapping her cheeks and sprinkling cool water on her face from a bottle. "Just wasting time," a female voice suddenly remarked. Nancy realized she was lying on the ground. The unexpected rescuer was not in sight, but a luxurious car parked directly in front of her drew her attention. A fancy car like that couldn't belong to someone poor. "How can you say that? What if she needs medical assistance? What if she doesn't regain consciousness?" a man retorted in indignation. "As if I care. Look, she's already opened her eyes," a woman retorted irritably. A worried stranger's face soon came into Nancy's view. He was well groomed with dark hair and a neat beard. Nancy's gaze shifted slightly and landed on a tidy name tag reading, "Harris, first-class driver." "Are you okay?" the man asked sympathetically. "I think so. Yes, I'm sorry," Nancy whispered. "Let me help you up." The driver extended his hand, allowing Nancy to lean on him as he gently helped her to her feet. Now, Nancy could freely look around and noticed a young woman in the back seat of the car. She also could assess the stature and strength of her unexpected saviour. He was a striking man, with vibrant green eyes, gleaming with unquenchable optimism. However, now his face was filled with worry. "Are you sure you're okay? Should we call for help?" the driver asked. "Are we leaving today or not?" The woman in the car immediately interrupted him. "Becky, why are you so rude?" the man said to her, and the woman snorted, crossing her arms over her chest. She was looking indifferently at Nancy, conveying her lack of interest in the plight of a mere peddler. Becky was a rich young woman, known for her impeccable looks and fashion sense. Unlike Nancy, she was admired for her graceful figure and perfect proportions. Her skin was flawless and firm, without any extra muscle or tan line. It was clear that Becky invested a lot of time and used high-end cosmetics to maintain her appearance. "Don't be embarrassed. I'm from the provinces myself. Therefore, I am always ready to help rural people." The driver smiled, taking Nancy's hiccup on his own account. "Thank you. I apologize for your delay." Nancy couldn't help but smile back. "I think you should end your work for today. I would walk you home, but I need to drive my passenger." He motioned towards Becky. "You must have broken some kind of rules to help me, huh? Will you be all right?" "Yes, he will," Becky hissed vindictively. "I'll make sure to tell my father that we're late because he decided to flirt with the milkmaids." Nancy looked at Becky in surprise. As a simple villager, she was not used to such open hostility, especially from a stranger who she had never wronged. "Report to whomever you wish. I couldn't leave a woman in trouble." Harris waved off dismissively. Becky's threats didn't seem to have made an impression on him, but Nancy felt awkward. "Excuse me, and thank you for your help." She frowned. "Now go, just go. I'll get home on my own." "Dad, can you believe it?" Becky shrieked from the threshold as soon as she and Harris arrived at the house. "What happened?" Mr. Mayor asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. This elegant gentleman epitomized the image of dignity and trustworthiness. Despite his age, he maintained a proud posture and an aura of confidence. The slight wrinkles on his face enhanced his dignified image, reflecting a wealth of life experience. "Instead of taking me home, your driver was flirting with some kind of milkmaids," Becky accused, glaring at her father. "Really?" Mr. Mayor looked even more surprised. "Harris, what happened?" The driver had just entered the house, carrying Becky's bags. "You see, we were driving along the highway, and there was a woman selling milk near a stop. She fainted from the heat. I saw it and I stopped to help her. You know, bring her to her senses." "And is that all?" grinned Becky's father. "Daughter, you need to be considerate. You're surrounded by real people, not robots." "Do we owe her anything? We can't save everyone," the girl hissed in anger. "What's wrong with stopping to help? Human life is no joke. If someone falls ill in front of you, the normal reaction is to offer help." "Why are you talking to me like a child? I'm actually 25 years old, if you haven't noticed," Becky exclaimed angrily. "Well, if you're an adult, then stop acting like a child and behave yourself," Mr. Mayer immediately retorted. He deeply loved his only daughter, who was a living reminder of his wife, who had tragically died from an illness. But at times, Becky was unbearable, throwing tantrums without reason. Whether this was a result of her upbringing or resolved teenage rebellion, Mr. Mayer was uncertain. He didn't know how to rectify this behaviour, but he held on to the hope that with time his daughter would mature and become more reasonable. "As you say," the girl snorted and then left the room, slamming the door defiantly. "Harris, do you think that woman is decent?" asked the man unexpectedly. "I don't know. We didn't have much time to socialise," shrugged the driver, "but she was very embarrassed about delaying us and seemed more concerned about me getting in trouble for violating regulations than her health. Can you find her? Ask her if she would like to work for me as a maid." "Well, I don't think finding her will be a problem. I remember the place where she has been selling her products. But why her?" "You see, a maid works right in the house. She will be in constant contact with us and know pretty much everything that's going on. That's why I don't want to hire anyone from a professional agency. Lately, rumours have started circulating that employees of such offices like to leak information to their employers." "Are you afraid of business rivals?" Harris nodded understandingly. "Yes, because I've run into them many times. I found bugs after electricians and cameras. I have too big business and too much money in production." "And you think a girl from the countryside wouldn't consider engaging in espionage out of the goodness of her heart?" Harris frowned. The suggestion seemed to upset Harris. The driver, a simple man from the suburbs, had started working for Mr. Mayer purely by chance. He enjoyed working for the businessman, who was known for his fairness and good treatment of his employees. Yet, amidst such luxury, Harris still felt improper. "Just hope that a man from the province will be nobler, above these underhanded intrigues, Mr. Mayer." Harris's thoughts didn't escape his watchful eye, therefore he added, "Especially since I have one good example of such a man." The man winked at Harris, who, realising the reference was to him, became slightly embarrassed. His relationship with Mr. Mayer felt more fatherly than that of a subordinate to a superior. Over the years, Harris had developed sincere respect for the businessman, who had seen life and always listened to his opinion, even if they sometimes disagreed. "And furthermore," Mr. Mayer continued, "I need a quick, unpretentious, hard-working woman who doesn't command an excessively high salary." "So you want to save money?" Harris muttered. "I just don't want to overpay for an agency brand name. Don't worry, I won't cut into her salary. She'll certainly earn more than from selling milk at the bus stop." Almost immediately after their conversation, Harris went to search for a future maid. However, she was nowhere to be found. There were no passers-by who knew the saleswoman as well. "I should have escorted her home, then I would have gotten her address," the driver said to himself as he examined the empty bus stop. What upset him most was that he was the one who advised her to go home to avoid another fainting spell. "Should I leave a note?" Harris lingered, scanning his surroundings. But without any clues to her address, he decided to return the following day. A note with his address or personal number could easily fall into the wrong hands, and considering Mr. Mayer's excessive suspiciousness, it was best not to disturb him. Moreover, he had been complaining about his troubled heart lately, so there was no need for additional stress. "Oh, come on," Harris grumbled, finding the bus stop empty again. This was the second time out of luck. He didn't even know the saleswoman's schedule. Would she return? Harris was determined to keep his word to Mr. Mayor, so he resolved to continue his attempts. "Hello! I finally found you here," Harris exclaimed on the third day. Luck was finally on his side, and he jumped joyfully out of the car upon spotting the woman in a white headscarf. "Good afternoon," she responded, smiling shyly. His unexpected appearance made her cautious. However, the handsome driver didn't seem threatening, and the fact that he had visited for days just to see her warmed the lonely woman's heart. "I completely forgot to introduce myself last time. I'm Harris. It's a pleasure to meet you here, in consciousness." "Nancy." "Beautiful name." Harris smiled. "Nancy, would you be interested in a job change? My boss is offering a position as a maid at his country estate. It's nearby, and the work is pleasant." "What kind of maid am I?" Nancy responded, gesturing dismissively. "It's nothing difficult. Your main duties would be maintaining cleanliness and order in the house. Occasionally you might need to run errands for Mr. Mayor, my boss." "I'm not sure." "Give it some thought. What's there to lose? It's a job in a big, beautiful house, and certainly beats standing on the curb selling milk." The offer was tempting from the start, but Nancy knew it just wasn't possible. As she understood it, a maid's job required her to be constantly at her employer's home. "I simply can't stay away from my home for a long time," Nancy replied, her gaze faltering. "I need to take care of my mother, and I have a son as well." "Don't even worry about it. Mr. Mayor assumed you wouldn't want to leave your household, so there will be no need for you to live in his house. I will bring you and take you back every day. No transportation problems, and all at the employer's expense. Give it some thought. It's a great job opportunity." "Well, there is some truth in what you say," Nancy muttered. "Why not give it a try?" "Great. Shall we go to the interview? I'll just let Mr. Mayor know." "Harris, I'm sorry, but first I have to take the rest of the milk home," Nancy interrupted the driver. "Wait for me here. I'll be right back." "Oh, don't even worry. I have a car. I'll take you." This time, Harris decided not to miss the opportunity to find out Nancy's address, so as not to lose contact. "Well, I see you're a decent woman, hard-working, dexterous. Quite a match for me," Mr. Mayor said. "Thank you. I tried," Nancy smiled. The interview was a bit strange. The businessman didn't want to waste time on long conversations, so he immediately asked the potential employee to clean one of the rooms. "Well, if it goes on like this, we're in for a very profitable cooperation. You can start your duties tomorrow, and here is a salary, payable at the beginning and middle of the month." Nancy modestly accepted the envelope. Even at first glance, there was 10 times more money than she was paid on the farm, not to mention the milk trade. And another paycheck was expected in just 2 weeks. "There's too much here. I'm afraid you're overestimating me," Nancy muttered, offering the envelope back. "Nancy, I'm a business person. Profitable investments are my job. Trust me, my company never wastes money." Nancy had already been a maid for several weeks. She was diligent in her duties, and after receiving the rest of her salary, she became even more committed. "Get out of my way!" Becky's displeased voice rang out suddenly. "What?" Nancy, busy dusting the cupboards, did not immediately respond to Mr. Mayor's daughter's command, resulting in a sharp nudge to her side. "Are you deaf?" Becky snapped. "I'm sorry." The woman quickly moved to the opposite end of the room, trying to stay out of sight of the volatile young woman. Becky had disliked the new maid from the first day, constantly attempting to humiliate or tease her. "By the way, make sure you change the linens by tomorrow. If I have to sleep on dirty sheets one more time because of you—" "They're fresh," Nancy said quietly. "Are you still arguing?" Becky advanced menacingly towards the maid, even swinging her hand. "Becky, your father is calling for you," said Harris, entering the room. "What are you doing here?" "None of your business," Becky shouted. Okay, but your father is still waiting for you. Becky turned abruptly and quickly left the room, causing the door jambs to rattle with another slam. Hysterical girl, Harris said at her back and turned to Nancy. What's your problem? Nothing, Nancy replied, barely audible. Harris squinted at the maid, shrinking in the corner. It was apparent that Mr. Mayer's daughter was intentionally attacking the new employee, harbouring hatred at some subconscious level. Do you want me to tell Mr. Mayer anything? Harris suggested, referring to Becky's antics. Don't. He'll be upset. I don't want to cause trouble in the family. The woman shook her head. But this can't continue. It's okay. You're too kind. Harris sighed. I wish I could scold her, even though she's already a grown woman. But who's going to let me? I'm also a subordinated person. Nancy smiled at his support, and Harris, for the umpteenth time, noted her natural beauty, which was increasingly captivating him. And what time will you be home today? He asked. I'll be a bit late. You heard it yourself. Becky wants new bedding. Why don't you let me help you then? Oh, then that fool will claim that you've spilled oil all over her car, Nancy smiled. Considering that I've never opened the hood myself, and all the work is done by the mechanics at the service, Harris chuckled. At this moment, unable to pull himself together, Harris moved closer to the maid and suddenly kissed her on the lips. She blushed, feeling like a schoolgirl sneaking a kiss with her lover under the stairs. Nancy stood on her toes and reciprocated the kiss. She felt as comfortable and at ease with Harris as never before. Who would have thought that I'd have to thank my work for a relationship with such a beautiful woman? The man smiled gently. It happened because you're a bad driver, sighed Nancy languidly. Why's that? Because you were looking at me more than at the road. I just felt a mutual interest and decided not to miss the opportunity. Harris winked. Sometimes I think I shouldn't agree to a date so quickly, Nancy smiled. We missed the stage where the gallant knight wins the lady's heart. But we can get to the most interesting part, the driver whispered conspiratorially before kissing her again. I think that's what's bothering Becky most of all. What's the big deal? Do you think she's interested in me? Of course. How could anyone overlook a handsome man with such a huge ego? Nancy giggled, poking Harris in the chest with her fist. Seriously speaking, she's just used to considering everyone around her as her property. And now, it turns out, I've taken her toy. Maybe. The man shook his head. Oh, I completely forgot. I need to get more gas before we hit the road. I'm sorry, I won't be able to help you with making the bed, or I won't have a vehicle to drive you home. Go then. Nancy smiled and returned to her duties. Nancy, come here, please. Mr. Mayer's voice came from the kitchen. Yeah? What's happened? She asked, opening the door. Well, it's me who wanted to ask you what happened here. The landlord pointed melancholically to an overturned flower pot, its soil scattered all over the floor. I'm sorry, I'll clean it up right away, the maid exclaimed. Yes, please do, before the soil scatters all over the house. Mr. Mayer nodded. And the guest room is a mess too. I've been finding too much clutter lately. Please pay closer attention to the house, and more frequently. I'm sorry, it won't happen again, Nancy muttered, blushing. She felt embarrassed to be reprimanded. Mr. Mayer was a very patient man, and he rarely scolded her, understanding that it was challenging to constantly monitor such a large house. He simply pointed out the mistakes so they wouldn't go unnoticed. But the most frustrating part was that the increasing disturbances in different parts of the house were not accidental. By the way, Becky asked again for you to be fired. Why don't you get along with her? As if by accident, the businessman asked. I don't know. Apparently she thinks I'm not professional enough, the woman answered modestly. Well, Nancy, try to make peace with her. Harmony at home is a crucial element of life. I will, she responded. However, It didn't depend on Nancy. In fact, Becky constantly created a mess on purpose and then swiftly ran to her father to highlight Nancy's negligence. Naturally, Nancy couldn't clean everything in time, which left Mr. Mayor thinking she was lazy and not very diligent. However, the businessman was not quick to dismiss the new employee because of her diligent ethic in the first weeks of work.
Yes, it's a large house. It's unfortunate that Tammy, Becky's mother, left so early. She had everything under control. Now it's just a semblance of a family home,
Mr. Mayor said, a note of sadness in his voice. I sympathise with you. My husband also passed away early, and it's challenging to fill that void. But it's never too late to let another person into your heart. Nancy cautiously consoled her host.
I suppose it's a bit late for me, replied Mr. Mayor, rubbing his chest.
I used to think the same, but you know, the main thing is to meet the right person. The man shuddered. Memories of Tammy caused a painful sting in his heart, leading to another round of unpleasant spasms. Would you like some water? Suggested Nancy, full of anxiety.
No. Oh!
Mr. Mayor staggered, then lost consciousness. Did you two lovebirds knock Daddy out? Becky hissed, her anger directed at the driver and the maid.
What does this have to do with us?
Harris retorted. Everything. Your negligence stressed him out, leading him to the hospital. He suffered a heart attack. We don't know when he'll be back. Nancy sobbed. The unfortunate attack had happened before her eyes, and she was still worried, actually considering herself guilty. When she saw him on the floor, she was confused, thought too long, and called an ambulance only 5 minutes later. At first, she went looking for Harris, then Becky. Only then did she realise she was alone and began dialing the ambulance, her fingers trembling over the keys. I've had enough of you two. While my father is receiving treatment, I'm in charge. As the mistress of this house, my first action is to fire both of you. Pack your things and leave. After reprimanding her former subordinates, Becky stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her.
Go to the hell.
Harris, don't. Nancy urged Harris. Let's go. Nothing can be fixed now. It's better for us to leave peacefully.
You're right. Let's visit Mr. Mayor. He's been in the hospital for days, and she hasn't visited him once. She doesn't care about how her not-young father feels, as long as she gets her hands on the family's money.
But we're there almost every day. He might be sick of us.
No, the doctors say social interaction and positive emotions are the best medicine. Let's go.
Don't tell him she fired us. We shouldn't give any extra stress. Let him get better without such news.
Of course,
Harris agreed. He left the official car keys and documents, took Nancy's hand and led her to his old car. It wasn't as flashy as the owner's, but it was well kept and functional. The drive to the hospital took about half an hour.
How are you doing, Chief?
Harris cheerfully asked as they were led to Mr. Mayor's room.
I'm hanging in there.
The businessman attempted a smile. Hello, Nancy greeted him with a sad smile. Mr. Mayor tried to brace himself and even attempted to get up, but it was clear to see he was not feeling well.
Is Becky not with you?
Mr. Mayor asked hopefully. Sorry, no, Nancy replied, shaking her head.
She's busy, planning to inherit and lead your empire.
Harris couldn't help himself and replied.
She's never had any family feelings,
Mr. Mayor sighed.
And she has always been a real headache. I suppose I failed in raising her.
It's understandable. She grew up without a mother. It might have affected her, Nancy proposed, shrugging her shoulders.
I tried my best to fill in for Tammy, but,
whispered the sick man with difficulty.
Enough of this. Let's cheer up,
Harris interjected, clapping his hands together.
By the way, is everything okay with you two? Becky isn't causing any trouble, is she?
Mr. Mayor asked. Harris and Nancy glanced at each other and then shook their heads almost in unison. No, not at all. Everything's fine, the woman replied quickly.
Well, at least that's good news, the businessman said, smiling with relief. What are the doctors saying? Harris quickly shifted the conversation in a different direction. Oh, nothing good. I've been lying here for days with no relief, Mr. Mayer grumbled. They say I need surgery, but honestly, I'm scared. Why? The driver raised an eyebrow. You've never been afraid, have you? Well, Becky consulted some specialists and then called me. She said I might not need this procedure because of my age and weakened body. She's convinced me to look for alternative treatments. I did some research as well, or rather, I read on the internet, Nancy interrupted. For your illness, there are no alternative treatments, just surgery. But why did Becky suggest waiting? The businessman frowned. I'm not sure, but I also haven't heard about a high mortality rate. In fact, they say it's a relatively simple operation. It's often performed successfully, with only a small percentage of lethal outcomes, even for patients your age. I think you should follow the doctor's recommendations. Harris joined his girlfriend. They looked at each other, clearly understanding Becky's motives. It was clear she intended to claim the family fortune and was dissuading her father from effective treatment with the hope of his demise. It's still a little scary, Mr. Mayer admitted, shaking his head. I understand what you're going through. Anyone would be afraid in this situation, but you're strong. You'll get through this. Nancy encouraged him with a smile. I agree. You've always been brave. Look at the empire you've built. Confront your illness head-on, or it will consume you, Harris advised. Perhaps you're right. Maybe it's worth a try, the businessman said weakly. Later that day, Mr. Mayer had a comprehensive discussion with the doctor, learning all the details and finally agreeing to proceed with the preparations. Do not worry. Our clinic is top-notch. We have first-class specialists and the best equipment in the country. We will ensure the highest quality care. You won't notice any difference, the doctor assured him after getting his signature on the documents. I hope so. I don't care about any money, as long as the treatment helps. That's the spirit. They say you can't buy health, but you can certainly invest in it. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Despite his attempts to stay calm, Mr. Mayer could not help but feel nervous as the date approached. However, the excitement was in vain. The surgeons did a fantastic job, successfully resolving the issue that had been limiting the businessman's heart function. Thank you, my dears, for convincing me to do it. It really worked. Mr. Mayer smiled cheerfully at Nancy and Harris. But why do you both look so grim? You see, here's the thing, Nancy began hesitantly. I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, Mr. Mayer, but your daughter has interfered in your business. She even convinced the board of directors that you were incurable. Harris didn't hold back. What? The businessman asked, taken aback. I'm sorry, but it's true, admitted the former maid. You should have seen how angry she was when she found out the operation was successful. It can't be, Mr. Mayer gasped. Sadly, it's true. We didn't want to tell you, but you were going to find out today anyway. It's better you hear it from us. Harris shook his head. She's cunning. She did everything she could to get what she wanted. She has transferred ownership of the house to herself and moved all the accounts and details. She became the sole owner of all the property. How can that be? We're family, Mr. Mayer whispered, his lips barely moving. The chamber door suddenly swung open, revealing a furious Becky. Her eyes sparkled with anger and her superiority, like lightning in a storm. Ah, great, everyone's here. Congratulations on the successful surgery, but it doesn't change anything. I'm the boss now, she hissed. Daughter. Shut up, old man. Why couldn't you just lie there and let me live peacefully? You're always dissatisfied with me, always meddling in my business. But now you can live wherever you want because I'm the boss. Are you trying to throw me out of my own house? Mr. Mayor exclaimed.
It's mine now, and you can go wherever you want. With that, Becky turned on her heels and stormed out of the room. A tense silence fell over the room. No one knew how to respond to what had just happened.
What am I going to do now? Mr. Mayor sighed, his voice filled with sorrow. The last money from my personal account went towards the operation. I can't even afford a hotel until I'm well enough to undo what Becky's done.
No hotels, Nancy said without hesitation. Now pack up. Take what you have and let's go to my place. My house is big enough. My mother and son live with me, but they won't mind.
It feels awkward. Why do you need me there? Mr. Mayor started to refuse.
No objections at all. Harris will drive us. Don't even think about resisting. I'm sorry, but I'm stronger than you right now. Nancy's eyebrows knitted together menacingly.
You've got a very spirited girlfriend, Mr. Mayor chuckled, looking at Harris. So, you knew we were dating? But how? The driver asked, bewildered. I was having heart problems, not eyesight problems. You two are so affectionate, always together. I knew exactly that such wonderful people had to be together. I knew it the moment I saw our lovely Nancy.
That's great, she responded with a joyful smile. Packing took quite a bit of time. Mr. Mayor's belongings easily fit into a single suitcase, as he only brought necessities to the hospital. Come in. Be careful, there's a step here, Nancy cautioned, leading the former chief to the porch.
My dear, I'm not made of glass. Don't worry, everything is fine. It's just a little bit more, and you'll put me in the wheelchair.
Mr. Mayor smiled warmly. I keep thinking you're struggling after the surgery, Nancy admitted, embarrassed.
He's just lost a little weight. His rehabilitation period is now over. He will get a fresh air here, and soon he'll be back in shape in no time. Our Mr. Mayor is not one to give up, Harris said energetically. Is your mother okay with my visit? The businessman clarified.
She's delighted. It provides her some entertainment. It gets lonely when I'm at work. Plus, she will certainly enjoy the company of such a gallant and imposing man.
Nancy giggled. Well, that's one way to put it, said Mr. Mayor, embarrassed. Let's go say hello then.
The young woman moved towards her mother's room and carefully opened the door. Are you awake? She asked. Of course, come in, the mother answered from behind the door. Suddenly a ringing voice made Mr. Mayor flinch. Oddly enough, the intonation seemed strikingly familiar, as if... Nancy opened the door, revealing her mother sitting in an armchair by the window. How do you do? Pardon for me sitting. It's hard for me to stand. My name is...
Eleanor,
the businessman interjected. He froze on the threshold, examining the familiar figure with disbelief. The woman's blonde hair, blue eyes, that hadn't dimmed with age. Nancy's mother had managed to maintain her elegance and beauty, emanating a unique aura of wisdom. Sam? The woman said in surprise. But how did you find me?
You have no idea. It's a long story.
The businessman exhaled, timidly stepping closer. Do you two know each other? Nancy asked, puzzled. Yes, daughter, Eleanor smiled. This is the same groom from my youth that I told you about. What's more, he is your own father.
What?
All present interrogated in one voice.
Wait, but how? Is it really true?
Mr. Mayor muttered. He sat opposite Eleanor, gently held her fingers and kissed them.
Where did you disappear to, my love?
You see, everything happened too quickly back then. My father, do you remember him? He was always against our relationship. The day I finally mustered the courage to elope with you, he somehow found out. He whisked me away to another city and practically imprisoned me there. It was only later, when it was too late, that I discovered I was pregnant with Nancy.
My father wouldn't let me contact you then, insisting we'd raise my daughter ourselves. Then events spiraled. Pregnancy, Mum's death, adult life. Everything changed so drastically, and I couldn't find you anymore. My poor girl, how did you cope? Mr. Mayor sighed sorrowfully. Well, it wasn't easy, but Nancy always gave me the strength not to give up. Eleanor smiled. Everything will be fine now. We're finally together, said the man confidently. What a twist! Harris whistled. Wait, I didn't understand anything. Are you serious about Mr. Mayor being my father? Nancy asked, standing frozen, as if afraid to forget the sudden news she had heard. She didn't dare look directly at the man she thought she knew well, yet in reality knew not at all. Yes, it's true, and the fact that you have met is a true miracle, her mother confirmed. We're all together, at last. Nancy sobbed happily, rushing to embrace her parents. A strange warmth filled Mr. Mayor's chest, bringing a sense of tranquility. Do I have to ask you for your wedding blessing, Chief? Harris teased, lightening the mood and drawing laughter from everyone present. Several weeks passed since their reunion. The family began settling into village life, managing their own household. Nancy returned to her old job, while Harris found work as a driver on the same farm. Well, will you manage here without us? Nancy asked. What will happen to us? Mr. Mayor responded with a grin. Well, you're not used to it, I suppose, in the village. Not a city or a rich mansion, after all, Nancy shrugged. Not a mansion. It's even better. Here, you know, the air is different. Mr. Mayor replied, inhaling a full breath. He had fully recovered from the operation, regaining his old self, and now he didn't look like an old man at all, flaunting a trim figure and noble grey hair. This place is good for both body and soul. Nothing superfluous. Everything as it should be. Mr. Mayor said thoughtfully. You know, I don't even regret my wealth. I created my business for your mother, to find her, but I couldn't. Who knew that a mere accident would bring us together? Accidents are not accidents, dear, said Eleanor, coming up behind him. Her health, too, had improved lately. She was getting up more often, moving around the house more confidently. She and Mr. Mayor even began to go for walks around the house, which Nancy was truly glad about. But so much labour has gone into your business, Harris shrugged. Exactly, labour. I'm so tired from living alone that now every day feels like a holiday. Yes, I don't have money, but my illness has finally receded. The woman I love is with me. My daughter married a good man. What more could you want? Maybe you're right, Harris replied with an embarrassed smile. I wonder how Becky is doing, Nancy suddenly asked. Don't mention that name, grumbled Harris. Didn't she cause us enough trouble? I just feel sorry for her. She did all those bad things out of loneliness and resentment against the world and herself, Nancy replied. You're too kind. Harris shook his head. Everyone should have a second chance, Nancy insisted. Suddenly there was an unexpected knock at the door. The early hour didn't suggest visitors, as most of the village's population would be at work on a weekday. Are you expecting someone? Nancy asked her parents. No, maybe it's the neighbours, but we agreed to meet in the evening. Everyone has their own business in the morning, Mum replied doubtfully. Nancy went to the front door and saw... Wow! What a surprise, she exclaimed. There's been a lot of coincidences lately. Don't tell me there's... But Harris didn't have time to finish. Nancy opened the door and everyone saw Becky modestly shuffling from foot to foot. Hello, she said quietly, too scared to look up. Why did you come here? asked Harris. Well, Harris, why are you so rude? Nancy intervened, cutting her husband off. Maybe something's happened. What does it matter to us? Please stop it, Nancy retorted. Mr. Mayor stared at the back of the room, uncertain of how to act. He had long forgiven his daughter for her past mistakes and desired to reconnect with her, but he was unsure how to tell Becky about Eleanor. He feared that his newfound relationship would be seen as a betrayal of Becky's mother's memory. However, he also didn't want to keep his first love in the secret from Becky. What's wrong, daughter? He finally asked, daring to step out of the shadows. Dad, I'm such a fool! Becky suddenly sobbed. Forgive me! Unable to bear the stances directed at her, the young woman broke down in tears. Large tears rolled down her cheeks, smearing her expensive mascara. I thought I could do it. And She attempted to explain, but her sobs choked her words. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide her emerging weakness. It's all right. Everything will be okay, Nancy said softly as she approached her. She gently hugged Becky, pulling her close. Mr. Mayor joined them immediately, aiming to comfort the troubled girl. Why are we in the hallway? Let's move to the living room. Come on in, Eleanor said, smiling warmly at the guest. Forgive me for intruding like this, Becky sobbed, beginning to calm down. What happened? Nancy asked. Nothing that my father didn't warn me about, Becky shrugged. Running a huge company isn't as easy as I thought. I almost foolishly ruined the business, pushing it to the brink of bankruptcy. What about the board of directors? Weren't they supposed to help you? Mr. Mayor asked, raising an eyebrow. I argued with them all at first, and then everyone wanted a piece of it, and they started to break up the whole company. So, you came to surrender? Harris asked. Nancy elbowed him immediately, but he had already realized his blunder. Dad, forgive me. I was such a fool, just impossible. Becky sobbed again. Of course I forgive you, daughter. I forgave you long ago. I understand everything. I was once young and impertinent myself. Thank you. But there's one condition. The businessman looked at his daughter seriously. What? Becky looked at her father in surprise, clearly surprised by his words. First of all, we need to settle all the problems to the end. I know that you and Nancy had a conflict, and I would like you to accept her. Of course. I've wanted to do it for a long time. I haven't finished yet. I would like you to accept her as your half-sister. What do you mean? Becky interjected, not understanding. Look, it's a long story. I hope you're old enough to understand it properly. Even before I met your mum, I met Eleanor. She gave birth to Nancy, who is my daughter too. So it turns out you have a half-sister that we didn't know about all these years. Becky looked at the woman she had despised not so long ago and shyly lowered her eyes. She now deeply regretted her rash actions. Please, forgive me for all those harsh words, she whispered. I know I've caused you much pain. I promise it won't happen again. Don't worry, I understand, smiled Nancy. Still, it might do you good to work among ordinary people, to experience the demands of rural labour, Harris noted. That's not a bad idea, Mr. Mayor agreed. Let's make it a condition. 6 months of work on a local farm. That'll serve as both your probation period and a lesson. I'll do anything, Becky agreed, bowing her head. I'll try my hardest. Hey, Dad. Working hard, I see, Nancy said as she walked into the office. Huh? What? What time is it? Mr. Mayor asked, setting aside his papers. Ever since he had to step back into the company, he had been spending more time in the office, sorting out the chaos created by Becky. You've forgotten all about us, Nancy replied with feigned resentment. It's evening already. Even the staff have long since gone. Oh well, I'm coming now. The businessman began to pack fussily, occasionally looking for some papers. All right. I knew you were doing something important. Here, at least eat, or you'll get skinny again," her daughter sympathetically offered, placing a container of homemade food on the table. "Thank you." After setting out the dinner, Nancy sat down next to her father. She really wanted to assist him, but she didn't understand the difficult economic intricacies of his company. And the only one who had some understanding in these matters, Becky, was still testing her skills on the farm. "Now, Becky, it's been 3 months. She hasn't given up yet." Mr. Mayer seemed to have read her thoughts. "She's hanging in there. She's doing really well. No one expected her to make it. You know, not bad at all for a city dweller, of course." "You're both good. You're both strong," the businessman said proudly. "By the way, the repairs at my mum's house are almost finished. Thank you for paying for everything. It's so beautiful there. Just like a fairy tale." "Come on, you're my family. What kind of bills can there be? Nothing's too expensive for you." "And one more thing." Nancy smiled mysteriously, then lowered her eyes and stroked her stomach. Only now the businessman noticed the change in his daughter's figure, the noticeable roundness of her belly. "After the wedding with Harris, things just happened. We didn't really plan it, but now we're very happy. You, my darlings. I'm so happy." Mr. Mayer jumped up from the table and hugged his daughter. The realization that their family was about to change made his heart flutter with joy, anticipating happy troubles. Rachel worked for a reputable travel agency that organized corporate and private VIP tours for affluent and demanding clients. According to her employment record, she was an outbound travel agent. However, in practice, she was a jack of all trades. One day she was engaged in sales or worked with clients. The next day she turned into a marketer or created authors' tours to remote corners of the world. And in the evening, she could become a cleaning lady. Why? The office needed cleaning, and the extra income always came in handy. In general, Rachel worked like a bee after the spring awakening, and she accumulated a number of stories about rich clients. For instance, one couple, planning their honeymoon, expressed a fear of sleeping on used mattresses. This led Rachel to personally contact every hotel they planned to visit and arrange for the delivery of new mattresses from a specific company, costing the tourists several $1,000s per mattress. Some people paid for tickets not only for themselves but also for their entire entourage, including nannies, cleaners and a driver. And one man decided that renting a yacht on vacation would not be respectable. It would be more solid to buy one. It wasn't a huge yacht, but still, it was his first yacht purchase. Rachel, who had arranged the deal, even joked that she bought a yacht in the morning and in the evening she cleaned the floors in the office and went to her tiny apartment to cook store-bought dumplings for dinner. It was indeed a day of contrasts. There were some unpleasant incidents involving inappropriate behaviour, substances, nudity and debauchery. However, Rachel preferred not to dwell on these memories. These issues were often resolved with large sums of money. Rachel lived in a very different world. Her life consisted of paying utility bills, standing in supermarket queues, and enjoying a discounted chocolate bar. Although she earned a decent salary, she couldn't throw money around. She had dreams of owning an apartment, so she saved her money. For now, she lived in a rented single-room apartment. Recently, Rachel had been considering getting a driver's license and buying a car to increase her mobility. Besides, she tried to help her mother and grandmother, who stayed in her hometown. The young girl was accustomed to achieving everything on her own. She secured a budget place at a college in the city and moved there from a provincial town in the region. She worked and studied diligently, often harming her health and social life. Rachel, without connections but with persistence, landed a job at a reputable travel firm. Therefore, she never relied on gifts or fate, for example, a fabulously rich fiancé, and of course,
She never believed in Cinderella-like fairy tales. After all, she was raised by two women who also never relied on men. However, the universe had different plans for Rachel. On a rainy Monday, her life took an abrupt turn. Many years later, she would recall the phrase, "The rich have their quirks." It all began when Rachel overslept, not hearing her alarm clock. Perhaps she did, but chose to silence the shrill sound and resume her peaceful slumber. Luckily for the girl, her neighbour on the side, who constantly slammed the door as if he hoped to blow it off its hinges, did not change his tradition. As he left for work, the door's slamming bolted Rachel awake. Disoriented, she sought her surroundings, a gut feeling telling her something was off. Upon finding her smartphone under the pillow, she was taken aback. Instantly, wide awake, she sprang from her bed. For the next 10 minutes, Rachel darted around her apartment, attempting to dress, eat breakfast, wash, and apply mascara simultaneously. "Damn it," Rachel grumbled, pulling on her tights. "Why don't I have the features of the Indian god Shiva? Multiple arms, I could use a couple of spare limbs this morning." Rachel hailed a cab, realizing she wouldn't make the bus. However, as they neared her office, the driver surprised her with some news. "I can't go any further. The road ahead is under repair and there's no place to turn around. We'll have to detour, which is quite far." "What?" Rachel exclaimed, straining her mind to gauge the distance she would have to cover in heels to reach her office. To make matters worse, it began to rain heavily, and Rachel had no umbrella. "But I ordered the cab to a specific location," she protested. "Call customer service," the gruff driver retorted. "Get out, or do you want to come back with me?" Rachel realized she had no time for an argument. Vowing to leave a negative review for the uncooperative driver, she stepped out into the rain. It carefully took the girl into its wet embrace, decorating to its taste. Her mascara, unable to withstand the rain, began to run down her cheeks, and her bright red hair coiled into unruly wet curls. Her white blouse was instantly drenched. Rachel attempted to dodge the puddles, performing impressive ballet-like leaps, but to no avail. As she approached the crosswalk, a white Lexus sped by, splashing her generously with water from a puddle. Rachel, a demure and sweet girl who blushed at movie bed scenes and was unaware of crude jokes, reached the end of her patience. And it was as if her skinny body was possessed by the foreman Ryan from her native town, who knew all the swear words in the world for every letter of the alphabet. The girl took a deep breath and blurted out, "You're an uncouth, arrogant drunk. Did you buy a license, a car, but forgot to buy manners? Didn't you? I hope you encounter red traffic lights everywhere, you creep. I hope you trip and faceplant in that damn puddle." Rachel added a few more profanities to her tirade. However, she was taken aback when the car stopped a few steps away from her, just before the crosswalk, and then began to reverse. The back window of the foreign car was slightly open, so her words had easily reached the driver. But it was not the driver she needed to worry about. The window slid down smoothly, and a handsome man glanced at her from the plush interior. "It's been a long time since anyone's spoken to me like that," he confessed, a charming smile playing on his lips. His teeth were straight and white, his skin was dark, his hair thick and dark, and his eyes were brown, like a strong brew. Perhaps on another day, Rachel might have swooned over such a handsome man's attention, like ice cream melting in the sun. But here's the problem. Her teeth were chattering from the cold, her shoes were squelching, her hair was dripping, and all of this was not conducive to flirting. "What a waste," Rachel muttered, still angry. "Apologies for my driver's actions," the man said, smiling. "If you're not planning on making a voodoo doll of me and sticking needles in it, maybe I can make it up to you?" Rachel, who had been preparing for a confrontation and had even defiantly puffed out her chest, was slightly taken aback. "No, thank you,"
she mumbled. Just drive carefully, please. She attempted to walk around the car, but the passenger signalled to the driver and the vehicle pulled up alongside Rachel again. The cabin door opened invitingly. I insist. I feel awful, the man complained. Get in. I'll take you where you need to go. I'll also cover the cost of your ruined clothes. Pick any store and we'll get you something new. And my driver will take care of the dry cleaning. Rachel's eyebrow twitched nervously as she thought. I get in the car and by morning my photo will be in the crime reports, like body found in the forest belt. Anyone missing? Why is he planning to undress and dress me up? No, thank you. Brushing the stray red strands from her forehead and upturning her nose, Rachel said, There's a fine line between persistence and harassment. So please, go on with your business and leave me alone. She finally managed to cross the road, muttering irritably something to herself. Rachel was not usually mean, but this morning she wanted very much to vent her frustration on someone, so this deep pocket happened to come in handy. Soon, Rachel arrived at the office. She rushed in, glanced at the clock and slumped into her chair. Got it in time, she exclaimed, dropping the bag beside her. A couple of Rachel's colleagues looked at her sympathetically, while Rachel eyed them enviously. They were perfectly dressed and had flawless makeup, ready for a catwalk. When do you all have the time to put on makeup and look so perfect? Asked Rachel, feeling like a witch who had crashed into a swamp while flying on a broom. The girls glanced at each other giggling. They sometimes treated Rachel with a hint of arrogance and condescension. Their behaviour wasn't malicious, but they seemed to believe that a girl from a small town couldn't match up to the city dwellers. It's simple. I might wake up at 3 or 5 in the morning, but I'll never leave the house without makeup and styling, Diane explained, as she peered into a pocket mirror, touching up her lipstick. We have respectable guests, after all. Of course, there aren't many bachelors, but I still hope to land a golden ticket. That's exactly what I mean, Sasha sighed dreamily, propping her cheek on her fist. I decided to work here specifically to find a decent groom. Given our wealthy clients, who would have thought they'd only travel abroad with their mistresses or wives? You could be someone's mistress, Diane suggested. Rachel thought Sasha would take offence at such a suggestion, but to her surprise, Sasha smiled coquettishly. Do you think so? Sasha beamed. There's one I like. He is the jewellery shop owner. He always flirts with me. I think I'll be more compliant with him next time. Rachel, who was trying to wipe mascara traces from her skin with a tissue, coughed. He's about 50 years old. 62, Sasha corrected her colleague, shrugging her shoulders. So what? Afterwards, the girls began discussing how and where to find a wealthy groom. Rachel did not join in the conversation. During the planning meeting, the girls were informed that an important client was expected to arrive at the office momentarily. The man was planning a trip for his work team. When he walked in, Rachel gasped audibly and hid under her desk in reflex, recognizing him as the man from the Lexus. Here, Mr. Liesel, the boss greeted warmly. Our top employees will handle your tour. We'll assign an agent for you in a separate office. We have Sasha, Diane, and, Rachel. Rachel realized she couldn't hide forever. Forcing a smile, she peeked out from under her desk, carefully avoiding the guest's gaze. Yes, sorry, I dropped a pen, she mumbled. Surprised by the behaviour of his most responsible employee, the boss mumbled something before resuming his conversation with Mr. Lisley in a deliberately kind tone. Rachel kept her gaze fixed on the screen, hoping the ground beneath her would swallow her whole, transporting her far away from this place. When Rachel dared to glance at their new client, she noticed his gaze fixed on her now flushed face. A thoughtful smile played upon the man's lips. I understand, Mr. Lisley interrupted. Can I have some privacy with any woman here? Unable to resist, Rachel scoffed to herself, as if he's choosing an escort. Yes, All of my employees are capable professionals and would be happy to—"
the boss replied nervously, but Adrian Leslie cut him off, pointing at Rachel.
"Rachel would be perfect," he said.
Rachel could feel the disappointment of her colleagues. It was no surprise. The man was dark-haired, mature, wealthy and handsome. Adrian Leslie stood out among the other guests at the agency, attracting much attention. "I'm busy at the moment," Rachel hesitated. "I need to plan a tour for—" Her boss coughed and looked at her in a way that promised a forfeiture of her bonus and maybe even termination. Reluctantly, Rachel walked down the corridor with the man, feeling as though she were on a scaffold. Once they were alone, she looked into Adrian's eyes. "Listen, I don't want this morning's incident to impact my work. I value my position and will organize your trip in the best possible way. However, let's leave the unusual encounter in the past." She looked hopefully at the man, realizing that not all wealthy individuals had a good temper. What if he took offense and decided to fire her, or ridicule her? He might even make outrageous demands, like requesting a trip to India on elephants. Meanwhile, Adrian shook his head, giving the girl another charming smile. "I can't promise you that, unfortunately." Rachel pressed her lips together and glared at him. "Don't act like a child. I got angry, but it's your fault too. Look at me." She stomped her foot, pointing at the stains on her pantyhose. Adrian sat down in the chair and, following her demand, looked intently at the red-haired girl. "I'm looking. I can't look away," he confessed unexpectedly. "And you misunderstood me, Rachel. I'm not intending any harm. I just don't want to forget our first meeting. It touched my heart deeply. Maybe it's love at first sight. If I erase this moment from my memory, what will I tell my grandchildren?" "What grandchildren?" mumbled Rachel, embarrassed by such a confession. "Our grandchildren." Adrian smiled even wider, though it seemed impossible to Rachel. This time, even her ears and neck turned red. Deciding to steer the conversation in a less dangerous direction, she went to work. Adrian turned out to be a pleasant client. They quickly settled many aspects of the matter. Then he asked her out on a date. "I don't date company clients, it's unethical," said Rachel. Adrian sighed dejectedly. "Then we'll have to cancel our deal. I'll go tell your management." Was it blackmailing? Undoubtedly. Did Rachel believe in that? Regrettably, yes. However, after spending a couple of hours alone, Adrian seemed entirely different than she had originally pictured him. He was witty, courteous and captivating. Rachel felt flattered by his attention. Of course, being a strikingly beautiful girl, she was always in the centre of male attention. Adrian, however, stood out from all the other suitors who had expressed interest in Rachel. Therefore, when he turned to go to her boss, Rachel impulsively declared, "Don't say anything to him. I agree." As Adrian turned around, Rachel thought he looked particularly handsome. From that moment, they began their romantic relationship. Adrian was the hereditary owner of a big company. However, his family was open-minded and did not mind that Adrian's chosen partner was of a lower social status. Adrian treated Rachel like a princess, creating a fairy tale-like experience for her. They enjoyed helicopter rides over the city at night, private dinners on rooftops, and exclusive bookings at restaurants. There were rose petals scattered on their hotel bed, expensive champagne on ice, and tickets to opera and theatre shows. They could also spend the whole night strolling through the streets of the city, discussing books, movies, sharing favourite recipes, and life stories. They could sit in the last row of a cinema and miss the movie because they were too busy kissing. They could enjoy French fries from a diner, have a picnic in the park, or wait in line at the zoo. Rachel soon recognised the competition she faced. Many girls admired Adrian, attempting to flirt, but he simply didn't notice them. It seemed as though Rachel had captured his attention. Indeed, she had. Adrian couldn't explain why he fell for her. He had been with prettier and more attractive girls, but something about Rachel stirred him. When she scolded his driver, something inside him sparked. Adrian felt like laughing despite the terrible morning he had, arguing with his father. Soaked, her hair darkened by water into an unusual maroon hue, she cursed him like a witch. Her eyes were a bewitching green, a detail Adrian noticed during their second encounter. He also found her attempts to hide amusing, and his spirits lifted. Deciding it was fate, Adrian was determined to pursue the beautiful and daring girl. After all, what were the odds of crossing paths with the same person twice, within an hour, in a vast city? Rachel was different from his initial perception. She exceeded his expectations. 100 times better. He fell in love with her daily, even multiple times a day. He appreciated Rachel's ability to argue and defend her opinions. He enjoyed her humour, as she could laugh at him and herself. He admired her courage and determination. He wouldn't admit it to Rachel, fearing it might offend her, but he relished introducing her to the luxurious side of life. He indulged her, taking her to fancy places, dressing her in the finest clothes, and treating her to exotic dishes. He was always eager to surprise her. Yet Rachel surprised him as well. 2 years into their relationship, Adrian proposed to Rachel. They got married a year later. Adrian insisted that Rachel quit her job at the travel agency. Despite the difficulty, Rachel agreed to take on the role of a rich man's wife. However, her character didn't allow her to merely stay at home or squander her husband's money shopping. Secretly, Rachel helped the household staff that Adrian hired. She cooked alongside the chef, gossiped with the maid, and even helped rearrange the linen or clean the living room. The gardener taught her how to tend to the roses and trees. On one occasion, she baked 2 pies, one for her husband and one for the staff, and they were touched and surprised by her kindness. However, other problems arose. For instance, Adrian was an extremely jealous man. He interpreted every smile from his wife as flirtation. Adrian was a man of contradictions. He insisted that his wife dress in designer clothes that mirrored his status. However, when she attracted attention of other men, he would become agitated. He would throw his jacket over Rachel's shoulders and send her home as if she were Cinderella, and it was midnight. Fitting into high society of the city was difficult for Rachel. She struggled to be accepted, especially by the affluent wives. It was as though they spoke different languages. Occasionally, Adrian expressed his embarrassment over some of Rachel's habits and characteristics. Ironically, these were the traits that he had initially adored in her, but had later grown tired of. Rachel was offended by that. Nevertheless, she was not overly concerned about such attitude. She believed that jealousy signified love. She had no desire to attend social gatherings, struggling to adapt to that society due to her simple nature. However, one incident deeply affected her. One evening, her husband had guests over. They were in the billiard room playing pool, drinking single malt, and laughing loudly. Rachel decided to serve the men appetizers herself. She knocked and entered the room with a tray. The guests were pleasant to her, yet her husband was furious and decided to escort her out. He grabbed her elbow sharply and painfully as they reached the door. "Are you out of your mind?" he exclaimed. "Are we out of maids that you're carrying a tray?" Rachel retorted resentfully, "I just wanted to be hospitable." "My wife doesn't serve food to men, okay?" Adrian growled, retreating to the game room. Later, during dinner with her in-laws, Rachel started offering business advice. Adrian dismissed her input, saying arrogantly that it wasn't a woman's place, and suggested she should discuss dresses in the women's room instead. Adrian's old-fashioned attitudes and his true feelings towards his wife became increasingly apparent. However, he cleverly alternated these moments with apologies, gifts, and declarations of love. Time and again, Rachel forgave him. After another year, their son Eric was born, marking a significant turning point in their lives. Rachel adored her son, lavishing him with love and attention. The challenges of motherhood sometimes overwhelmed her, leading to tears and sleepless nights. Still, she cherished every moment with her boy. Adrian, however, struggled with fatherhood. He disliked the messiness that came with raising a child, especially when it threatened his pristine white leather sofa. Adrian was upset that his wife was paying him less attention. "Are you jealous?" she finally asked one day, looking at her husband with a smirk. She expected him to take it as a joke, but Adrian's tight-lipped expression showed he wasn't amused. She tried to explain that their child needed extra care, but Adrian remained distant. She suggested spending time together and going on dates, engaged him in games with their child, but to no avail. With time, Adrian began to criticize her more often. Instead of compliments and encouragement, he pointed out her flaws. "You have stretch marks on your belly. They look disgusting, like something from a horror movie. You should see a doctor to get them removed. Money isn't an issue, otherwise we won't be able to go to the beach together." He criticized her weight, her bun hairstyle, which she wore because their son liked to pull her hair, and more. He also couldn't bear the sight of the bruises under his wife's eyes. They had appeared after Eric fell ill, and she had to sit by his bedside all night. So little by little, their marital relationship was gradually deteriorating. Adrian was rarely home, using his work as an excuse. On weekends, he attended parties and gatherings with friends, but didn't invite Rachel, citing her exhaustion and appearance. Previously, he would invite her on business trips abroad, but now he didn't even consider it. "Are you going to fly with me along with Eric? He'll cry during the flight, and I'm used to the comfort environment," he scoffed. "You don't like the nanny's help, so stay with him until he's 18. Rachel, biting her lip, once again explained her stance to her husband. "I have no objections to a nanny's assistance. I'm just reluctant to leave our young child with a stranger for an extended period. Eric can't even speak yet. He wouldn't be able to express any issues," said the woman. "That's fine. Enjoy your time with him," Adrian retorted dismissively. As a result, Rachel stayed alone in the mansion again and again, feeling like a ghost or a shadow of an alive person. She felt like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. She spent extensive time with her son, while Adrian increasingly distanced himself, finally moving from their shared bedroom to another room. This situation continued for 2 years. Rachel held on to the hope that things would return to the way they once were. After all, she had sincerely loved Adrian at one point. She couldn't believe that their relationship could abruptly end as it had begun. However, her husband spun for his wife completely another fairy tale. Once Adrian came home on Sunday morning, but he wasn't alone. He brought with him a dazzling blonde young woman, similar to those you see on social media. She seemed to be a living embodiment of fashion trends. "Meet Rachel. This is Missy. She will be staying with us for a while. Missy is carrying my child, so she needs to live in comfortable conditions," Adrian announced. Rachel thought she must have misheard him. Perhaps she was asleep, and this was all just a nightmare. "What?" Rachel questioned, her face contorting into a frown. "Is this some sort of joke?" Adrian looked defiantly at Missy, placing his hand on her waist. "No, there are no jokes here. Missy and I met a 1.5 years ago. You surely didn't think those occasional nights with you were enough to satisfy a man. Naturally, I sought love elsewhere," he stated, grinning at Rachel's shocked expression. "Don't look so surprised, Rachel. All my friends have a mistress in each city. Didn't I mention that even my grandfather had mistresses? My father had one too. He supports her, bought her an apartment, a car. We never discuss it during family gatherings, but my mother knows everything. And like a wise woman,
she turns a blind eye. As a smart woman, she understands that men are monogamous. Therefore, you should be smart, Rachel, too. The cheeks of his wife flared up. Adrian, do you think you're an Arab sheikh? The woman instantly bristled. You know, my dear hubby, I have no intention of being the first wife in a harem, so keep your fantasies to yourself. Who do you think you are? How dare you come into the house with her? Shut up, Adrian said sharply, his eyes darkening. This is my house, Rachel. My house. The only thing you have here is dirt under your fingernails. So know your place. Rachel realized it was real. Yeah, maybe Adrian's lost his mind, but she's not going to dig into this mess and find out why her husband decided to humiliate her like this. Not just cheat, but bring a pregnant mistress into their home. All this time, Missy stood timidly behind Adrian, seemingly afraid that the red-haired woman would confront her. However, Rachel didn't care about her rival. In fact, she finally realized that she didn't care about Adrian either. Good, she responded, her tone suddenly cold, her arms crossed over her chest. Then we can divorce. I hope you can find time in your busy schedule for it. Missy quickly glanced at her lover, who seemed unhappy with this reaction. However, Adrian retorted, No, Rachel, I won't give you a divorce. If you were once mine, then you're always mine, okay? If you want to leave, then leave. But my son stays with me. Rachel's mind spun. She couldn't imagine life without Eric. This makes no sense, she muttered, trying to comprehend Adrian's logic. You don't want to be with me. You're showing off to this girl, but you won't let me go. Why? We don't divorce in our family, and we don't abandon our children, Adrian said. You know that. Besides, we have a family values fundraiser coming up. Are you suggesting I show up as a divorced man? Whoa! Are you scared for your reputation? Rachel scoffed. And having a mistress in the house won't tarnish your reputation. Polygamy is illegal in our country, in case you didn't know. Adrian shrugged. I told you this is temporary. I'll decide where it's best for Missy to live later. But now the doctor says she needs fresh air, and I don't have another country house in the city. I can't really keep her with her parents. Rachel's pulse thundered in her temples. Her heart pounded in her throat, and her hands were slick with sweat. She wondered how she was still standing instead of collapsing from the stress. Defiantly, she said, Eric and I will leave. You don't even like him. I just don't like little kids, but he'll grow up, Adrian countered. For now, I can hire a nanny, even a whole team of them. But think about it, Rachel. Who can provide better for him? You, in your backwoods, where I paid for your mother's new apartment and arranged your grandmother's funeral? Or here, with his family? I think the answer is obvious. Rachel's hands clenched. Suddenly, she noticed Miss's gaze. The cunning girl was trembling, playing the victim while huddled against Adrian, but her eyes glittered with mockery. Rachel imagined the consequences if she packed her bags and left out of pride. Adrian most likely would take her son away. Adrian would take away her son, and his mistress would become stepmother to their son. And Rachel's heart told her that she would be the most evil stepmother of all. No, she couldn't abandon Eric. Deciding against any rash actions, the woman took a deep breath. Closing her eyes for a brief moment, when she reopened them, all traces of anger, despair, and resentment were gone. Instead, her emerald eyes held a penetrating emptiness that made Adrian wince. Straightening her shoulders like a true aristocrat, the mistress of the house, she gave the blonde an indifferent look and said, Well, make yourself at home, Missy. With a dignified turn,
Rachel walked away to the room she had long shared with her son. It was there she finally allowed herself to cry, quietly, so as not to awaken Eric, who took a nap after dinner, and thus began a strange new chapter in their lives. Rachel was aware of another woman living in the vast mansion. Its size was such that you could avoid crossing paths with anyone if you so wished. Rachel desired this isolation, but Missy sought the opposite. Of course, Adrian's mistress didn't try to be Rachel's friend, but she was always bothering her. If Rachel was walking with Eric in the garden, Missy would rush there to sunbathe or make a phone call. If Rachel were in the pool, Missy would appear in her swimsuit. And when Rachel had breakfast, Missy would begin drinking coffee. Missy often tried to provoke conflicts with Rachel. However, the lady of the house ignored her, which infuriated Missy. And then 2 months later, something terrible occurred. Everyone noticed Miss's health was deteriorating. A family doctor was called, and soon he noticed signs of intoxication in the pregnant woman and questioned her about her medication and diet. To avoid any unnecessary gossips, Adrian took it upon himself to resolve the issue. He summoned all the servants, from the cook to the maid, to understand what had happened to Missy. Then one of the new maids, pale and blushing, confessed, she stammered, wringing her hands.
Speak up,
Adrian bellowed, interrogating the suspects like a seasoned investigator. Mrs. Leslie ordered me to put a dietary supplement in Mrs. Evening tea, the maid blurted out. She said she drank the same tea when she was pregnant. It helps with sleep. A vial containing the supplement was found in the kitchen. Identical vials were found in Rachel's room. After analysis, it was revealed that the vials contained a toxic solution. In small doses, this poison is harmless, the expert explained. However, it's insidious. Regular consumption leads to damages to the body, in this case, likely the fetus. Adrian immediately brought his wife to his office for an explanation. The woman, seated in a chair, looked at him as if he were a fool. You've known me for a long time, Adrian. Do you really think I would keep evidence of a crime in my room? Do you think I'm such a stupid woman? She leaned back in her chair. I think a jealous woman is capable of foolish and desperate acts, he said. Or do you want me to believe that Missy drank the poison herself to frame you? Rachel smiled wide and bright. I think a jealous woman is capable of foolish and desperate acts, she echoed her husband's words, then added caustically, but of the two of us, only Missy is jealous of you. I don't care about you now. Adrian's heart clenched. It was strange. He felt something similar to what he had felt before when he had seen Rachel for the first time. Yes, he was aware that he was bored with her. He had had enough of that gimmick woman, and he was deeply disappointed that he would have to live with only one woman for the rest of his life, especially since she was always babysitting now. But did he feel guilty? No. After all, even a nice new car has a shelf life. A normal man often seeks novelty, unexplored territories. For Adrian, Missy became that new fascination. She appeared at a party, capturing his attention. He held no particular affection for her. Rather, he liked that she was as malleable as clay, letting him shape her as he pleased. Missy listened to his every word like a devout follower. In truth, he was her world. Adrian showered her with gifts, and she thanked him for each one, like a dog grateful for a bone. Rachel never behaved this way. She was too bold, too arrogant, too proud. The news of Missy's pregnancy took Adrian surprised, but he chose to accept it, especially since Missy threatened to announce her condition to the world if he did not support her. Bringing Missy into the house had been a spontaneous idea. Adrian wanted Rachel to feel jealous, to vie for his attention. But her reaction puzzled him. Why did she look at him with such disdain, as if he wasn't her benefactor? He was the one providing her needs. Why was it like this? Had he failed to to tame her? Adrian also couldn't understand why he was still attracted to his wife. It was as if their arguments had kindled his feelings. Suddenly the man rose and locked the study door. Rachel tensed, asking, "What are you doing?" Her eyes darted to the window and the man grinned. "The second floor, Rachel. Are you planning to jump?" "I don't know yet," she responded, observing the man's actions. Adrian unbuckled his belt and began to remove his shirt. Rachel's expression tightened. "What are you doing?" she repeated. "I'm here to collect a debt from you. A matrimonial debt. This whole poisoning incident has got me upset. I believe it's your doing and you should be punished." He slapped his belt against his palm. "You're insane," Rachel replied, springing to her feet. She was bewildered. When had Adrian become like this? Or had these traits always been within him, and she had simply been oblivious, only noticing his positive attributes and ignoring the warning signs? "Rachel, have you heard that after a fight, the night is the most intense?" Adrian asked gruffly. "Stay away! You are disgusting to me!" Rachel shouted. Adrian lunged at her, attempting to pin her against the desk. Documents and an expensive fountain pen, Rachel's New Year gift to her husband, flew from the surface. Rachel tried to scream, but Adrian covered her mouth with his hand. He was significantly stronger, and soon the exhausted woman gave in. The ordeal was quickly over. Adrian was satisfied, while Rachel was devastated. "I won't file a police report about your attempt to harm Missy," he said, pulling on his pants. "But you no longer have a place here with Missy. You'll move to your mother's place. Our son stays here. If you dare to utter a word, you'll be jailed for poisoning. And, by the way, before you leave my study, clean everything up." Rachel remained silent. She picked up her torn blouse and covered herself. As soon as Adrian left, she bent down to pick up the handle. Her hand froze as she spotted a familiar surname on a piece of paper lying on the floor. "Flannery," Rachel muttered, feeling like she'd heard it somewhere before. Then it hit her. She realized it wasn't yet time to let go. The next day, Rachel departed, but within a week she had evidence that her husband was involved in illicit activities. Armed with this evidence, she returned to the house, to the very study where her husband humiliated her and almost destroyed her. "Did you miss me?" Adrian snorted upon seeing his wife. "Here are the copies of some very interesting for tax service documents. There's enough here for a few prison terms," she said, tossing a stack of papers onto his desk. "Your father had no idea what you were doing behind his back, did he?" Adrian scanned the papers, turning paler with each page he turned. "Where did all this come from? Are you joking with this? How?" Rachel replied with a modest smile. "You always insisted that women should stick to discussing fashion. I don't care for fashion. I've been paying attention to the so-called wise men. I learned a lot about underhanded and fraudulent deals. The rest was just a matter of time. By the way, thanks for the tip," she said, smirking. "The papers you had me collect that evening, Tom Flannery's name was on them. He was your right hand in your grey schemes of tax evasion, and he used to be our guest. You always mentioned grey schemes and black cash, making the company's trade impossible to trace. Oh, and one more thing. Your safe." She gestured towards the safe next to the cabinet in the study. "The password is your birthday?" "That's really stupid," she smirked. The man pressed his lips nervously. "You shouldn't play this male game, Rachel. I'll get out of it, and you'll end up in jail." "For what?" Rachel asked, surprised. "For poisoning someone's cup, for example," Adrian roared. "Oh, I have something else for you," Rachel said softly, and with a seemingly gentle but extremely cold smile. She pulled out her phone and played a recording. On the video, Missy's voice could be heard. "I had no other choice. I don't care if the baby doesn't survive. The main thing is to become Adrian's wife. I'm tired of being a mistress. His wife irritated me, as did the baby," the woman confessed over the phone to a friend. "I've got a couple of other fascinating videos with the same content. You also appeared in a couple of movies," said Rachel, when the recording was finished. "How? You couldn't. You weren't there," mumbled Adrian, who turned palpably pale. Rachel shrugged with the same angelic smile. She wasn't going to tell him that it was the maids, the cook and the gardener who had become her eyes and ears. They despised Missy, and they truly loved Rachel and decided to support her. Even the poor maid, a young girl, couldn't withstand the guilt and confessed that Missy forced her to lie. She was putting poison in her cup by herself. "What do you want?" Adrian asked. "A son? Money? What?" "Justice," Rachel answered. "All the materials have already been sent to the right place, Adrian, so you can relax now. Everything is decided." Soon, Adrian found himself in prison, unable to buy his way out due to the extensive evidence Rachel had collected. Although his lawyer secured a short sentence, Rachel was indifferent. Missy fled immediately, fearing retaliation, but Rachel had no intention of pursuing her. She filed for divorce, and their marriage was dissolved unilaterally, with half of the man's property going to his wife and son, including a mansion with a reliable team. Rachel moved her mum into this mansion. She and Eric led a wonderful life. Using her ex-husband's money, Rachel opened her own travel agency, not for the wealthy, but for ordinary people. She had learned that the rich have their peculiarities, like demanding new mattresses or having a couple of women under one roof. She decided she didn't want to deal with them anymore. Glenn Turner was returning home early in the morning after a long shift at the hospital. He was eager to get some rest. However, he was also excited about some news that he couldn't wait to share with his wife, Alexa. Married for 8 years, their relationship was built on trust and mutual support. He was confident that Alexa would be thrilled with his news. Hearing the key in the lock, Alexa came out to greet him and kissed. "Hi, dear. How are you? You seem mysterious," the woman said. She went to the kitchen and started preparing a hearty breakfast, waiting for Glenn's explanation. "I've been offered a position at the Med Expert Clinic," Glenn announced. "Wow! Is that the clinic your former department head opened?" "That's the one. Can you believe it? Dr. Hammond called me today. I feel so uplifted." "Glenn, that's fantastic. You deserve this. He wouldn't just call anyone into his business. He must strongly value you as a specialist." "I was the best at the academy," shrugged Glenn. Glenn didn't doubt himself, but he was still in disbelief about his good fortune. The salary of a city hospital worker vastly differed from that of a clinic doctor. However, what truly attracted Glenn to working at Med Expert was the chance to conduct his own medical research, thanks to the funding from various sponsors. "You have to accept it. You deserve it. Just think about the opportunities that will open up for you. At the hospital, the management is stifling you. There's no growth." "But Oliver is also there," Glenn reminded his wife softly. Glenn had been friends with Oliver since their days at the medical academy, but they had quickly become foes. Glenn was a kind soul who rarely spoke ill of others and always attempted to understand their actions. On the other hand, Oliver was outspoken about his displeasure and never avoided being mean. "Well, let it be," Alexa carelessly dismissed with a wave of her hand. Without uttering a word, Glenn hugged his wife. "Thank you, my love, for always believing in me." The woman smiled happily and hugged him back, reassuring him, "You will succeed. Don't even think of doubting yourself." After a few hours of sleep, Glenn woke up and without wasting much time, he called his former supervisor.
"So, my dear, do you agree?"
Dr. Hammond's coarse voice came through the phone.
"Of course, Dr. Hammond. I'm ready to work for the good of mankind in your clinic."
Glenn responded cheerfully.
"But I'll have to fulfill my obligation at the hospital first." I see. It's very difficult to find a good surgeon these days. I've known your head doctor for a long time, so I won't push. Let him find you a good replacement."
Glenn was encouraged by Alexa's support and her faith in his professional success. Even the presence of her husband's rival in the form of a former friend did not shake her faith in him. She was firmly convinced her talented husband would save numerous lives. At his new place of work, Glenn was continuously astounded by the pricey equipment, which he had only dreamt of before. He was also pleased with the organisation of the work process and the full staff of medical personnel.
"Hey, you!"
Somebody addressed Glenn on his first workday. He immediately recognised that voice.
"Who gave you that uniform?"
"Hello, Oliver," Glenn replied discreetly, not responding to the man's comment.
"And it's you! I mistook you for an orderly. I see someone unfamiliar is walking around. So Dr. Hammond also dragged you here."
"Well, you're not the only one from our graduating class to glorify the name of our academy. I have to go. I'll see you around sometime." Glenn breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that Oliver hadn't upset him with a foolish prank. He was always trying to humiliate his opponents or ridicule them. Glenn once enjoyed such pranks, but he had matured since then. Glenn was fully consumed by his job at Med Expert Clinic. He appreciated that his wife had chosen to become a housewife because he was too exhausted to do anything else after his shifts at work. The initial months at his new job were challenging. His colleagues were not exactly welcoming, and he had to earn their trust and the nurses' respect. And of course, Oliver made things even more difficult by often recounting incidents from their residency in which Glenn appeared inept. Meanwhile, Glenn was so engrossed in his professional issues that he failed to notice Alexa and the changes in her mood. But one day he realized that something was off about her. She would drop things, bump into furniture, or just stand thoughtfully in the middle of a room. "Something's bothering you." Glenn moved away from the couch to approach her. "Alexa, are you okay?" "I want a divorce," she said softly, and Glenn didn't immediately make out the words. "What?" "I want a divorce. We need a divorce." "What are you talking about?" he asked in confusion. "I'm infertile, Glenn. Infertile. How many years have we been trying to conceive a child? I've had a checkup, and it's not possible. I can't give you a child, and without that, there can be no marriage. You'll be unhappy with me, and you'll end up hating me." "Oh dear, you scared me so much," Glenn replied, clutching his forehead. "Why so drastic? Silly." He hugged Alexa. "We love each other. That's the main thing. If we can't have our own child, we can adopt." "Really?" Alexa asked through her tears. "Of course, honey. Come here. You've been torturing yourself for months in vain. You can always count on me. Always. We're a family. Don't be afraid to discuss important things with me." Glenn had dreamt of becoming a father, but he hadn't realized how much their struggles had affected his wife. She had never complained about wanting to become a mother immediately. To cheer her up, he proposed that they contact the local orphanage and meet some children. And so they did. "Isn't she wonderful?" Alexa asked, her face lighting up with a smile as she watched her husband look at 3-year-old Kira. The couple was charmed by her ringing laughter and blonde curls. "Really?" Glenn agreed. The adoption went smoothly. A promising surgeon and his wife were deemed excellent potential parents for the little one, who was abandoned in infancy by her indifferent parents. "Who's there?" "Daddy!" Alexa cheerfully shrieked, greeting her husband in the hallway with their daughter in her arms. "Daddy!" the girl repeated after her mum, reaching her arms towards Glenn.
"Hello, my princess."
Glenn easily picked up Kira and kissed his wife.
"Hi, my queen. So, what have you been up to?"
"We made soup for lunch, went to the playground. Kira made a friend, didn't you, sunshine?" Alexa affectionately stroked the little girl's fluffy hair. Glenn couldn't help but admit that Alexa was a wonderful mum. She was attentive, caring, and still managed to carry out her usual routine, even after looking after an active child. Alexa never neglected Kira's needs and always made time for her. Glenn hoped that his wife would finally change and regain the sparkle in her eyes. But even adoption didn't help. Alexa dutifully did everything expected of her, but Glenn started to think she was unhappy. He suspected she might be suffering from depression, and that their sudden new role as parents couldn't heal her.
"Why don't we go to the Philharmonic concert on Friday? We could hire a babysitter for the day and then visit your favourite restaurant. We haven't had a night out in a while. I think it would be good for you," he suggested after dinner. "If there is anything you need, just let me know. I can see how hard you're working to be a good mother to Kira."
"Thanks, honey. I really haven't been out in a while," Alexa replied, without much enthusiasm. During the weekend, Glenn tried to spend more time with his wife and daughter. He struggled to find a way to discuss Alexa's condition and offer her support. For 6 months, the family lived in this rhythm. Glenn thought Alexa seemed more active and cheerful. They started going out more often, leaving Kira with a nanny. Glenn assumed things were improving, and he had nothing to worry about. However, one day after a long surgery, he received a call from an unfamiliar number that unsettled him. "Mr. Turner, your wife's car was found in the river. Divers are searching for her, but the chances of survival are minor." "Wait, what? What are you saying?" Glenn was utterly confused. He couldn't believe what he was hearing.
"What kind of sick joke is this?"
"I'm sorry, but it's not a joke. We can't provide any definite answers right now. You'll have to wait until the search is complete." Unable to think of anything, Glenn started calling Alexa, but all was to no avail. So he drove home, hoping that he would find his wife unharmed there. But he found only Kira and her nanny there. "Where could she have gone?" Glenn asked the woman. "I don't know, Mr. Turner. She left after lunch and never returned," the nanny replied, holding the little Kira in her arms. My God, what could happen? For the following days, Glenn was in a state of shock. He barely managed to take a few days off to process the situation. The constant worry was overwhelming. The divers concluded their search for Alexa's body without finding it. "Why did you call off the search?" Glenn argued, running along the riverbank. "She couldn't have just vanished. You need to find her body. Otherwise I won't believe it." "Mr. Turner, we understand your grief, but our resources are limited. We have other tasks to attend to." "I don't care. I need to find my wife. She could still be alive. She might have managed to get out on her own." "But don't you think she would have contacted you if she was still alive?" Accustomed to looking at the world through the prism of logic, Glenn could not get it into his head that his wife had disappeared without a trace. He knew that her survival, even if she escaped the flooded car, seemed improbable, given the icy cold water and the strong current. It was late fall. The river must have swept Alexa away. These things happen, and the families of victims must come to terms with their loss. "What about that woman?" Glenn insisted. The investigation had revealed that Alexa had picked up somewhere an unkempt elderly woman, and that they were seen on the security cameras before Alexa's car got into the river. It was unclear if this mystery woman had left the car before the accident. What if she's the one to be responsible for the accident? Alexa rarely lets strangers get into her car. Surely it was that woman who did something bad to my wife, Glenn reasoned. "Mr. Turner, please calm down. We're doing everything possible
to find your wife." The officer reassured him. "The security camera footage isn't clear, but we've enhanced the image of the unknown woman and shared it with all departments. Volunteers are assisting too, searching the streets and speaking with the homeless." Glenn spent all his weekends trying to find Jane Doe. He believed she would know the answers to all his questions. No matter how hard he tried, no one on the street could identify her. As time wore on, Glenn began to lose hope, especially as the police seemed to reduce their active pursuit of the case. "Glenn, I'm very sorry about Alexa," Dr. Hammond said to him. "I'm a widower myself. I know how you feel." "Alexa's not dead," Glenn immediately responded. All right. I didn't mean to upset you. I'm here to offer you any help you need. You're like a son to me. But now you have a daughter. You can't remain despondent all the time. She needs a reliable, attentive parent. Think about the impact your state will have on your daughter." "You're right," Glenn agreed quietly, a lone tear escaping. "Alexa would never neglect Kira, and I've completely given up. I have to become the best dad too, if Alexa doesn't come back." Glenn had to accept that their family now consisted of just 2 people. Gradually, he was able to smile at his daughter again, fulfilling the roles of both parents. "Daddy, I love you," the little girl murmured before bedtime, giving Glenn the strength to keep going. "I love you too. Now, go to sleep." The everyday life of a single father was more complex than Glenn had anticipated. Thanks to his position at the clinic, he was able to enroll Kira in a daycare centre for employees' children. This allowed him to always be there for his daughter, confident that she was in good hands. In a short time, he had learned how to dress her properly and braid her hair, so she would be comfortable throughout the day. "Spending time with my daughter rejuvenates me after hours of surgery. It's as if she's healing me," Glenn thought to himself occasionally. Time flew by, and soon Glenn escorted Kira to school for the first time. "You look so beautiful," Glenn exclaimed, admiring his formally dressed daughter. Kira's 2 long blonde braids were lovely, and her blue school uniform made her look slightly older. "I can't wait to meet everyone," the little girl exclaimed. Kira was well prepared for school and could share many interesting stories about life in the clinic with her classmates. She spent most of her free time there. Kira was thrilled with her first classes, fascinated by how different they were from kindergarten. The girl went to school on her own. Glenn was not afraid of her and even proud of his daughter's independence. The school was only a few minutes' walk away, and Glenn walked the route with Kira beforehand so that it was fixed in the girl's head. "The main thing is to cross the road in the right place and look right and left," Kira repeated to assure her father that she remembered everything. "And after school, go straight home, don't detour." "Good girl," Glenn kissed Kira. On a rainy day, Kira noticed a strange elderly woman standing under the store's canopy. She had an umbrella, but the woman was clearly wet and cold. Known for her kindness, Kira couldn't ignore her plight. "Hello, are you cold?" Kira asked, mustering her courage. "Hello, dear. It's nothing. I'm a bit wet, but I'll dry off soon," Mrs. Mathis replied, too embarrassed to admit her homeless state to this little girl. Most children believe that a successful future awaits them, a good job, a new home, a family, and other achievements. However, it's possible for someone to lose everything instantly and struggle to recover. "I invite you to my home. We can have tea and you can warm up a little." "Oh, no, dear. Your parents might not appreciate a guest like me." "It's all right. Daddy won't be home for a few hours. Let's keep this our little secret," insisted Kira. Mrs. Mathis wanted to refuse, but the temptation was too great. Her worn-out coat, which she had used for years, had no place to dry. While she was largely unnoticed by others, a little girl named Kira saw her differently. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll accept your offer, but only for a bit. I don't want to cause any trouble for you," Mrs. Mathis replied, following Kira. Kira led her to the newly built buildings with gorgeous entrances. Inside, the hallways were expansive, decorated with pictures and large pots of well-maintained indoor plants. "What a lovely place," Mrs. Mathis declared upon stepping into Kira's apartment. "My daddy is a surgeon," Kira proudly shared, guiding Mrs. Mathis around. "You can wash your hands here and hang your coat on the heater to dry it faster." Mrs. Mathis felt a bit strange being looked after by the 7-year-old Kira, chattering constantly, laid out snacks and sweets on the table. She was attentive to her guests and did not let them get bored. Nevertheless, Mrs. Mathis kept a wary eye on the entrance, apprehensive about the apartment's owner return. Her gut told her that the man would kick her out immediately or call the police. "Don't worry. If Daddy comes back, I won't give you away," Kira promised sincerely. Mrs. Mathis could see her sincerity, but it offered little comfort. A few minutes of warmth had cost her a great deal of anxiety. "It's like a game. Dad won't find out about anything." But suddenly the front door opened, and Kira froze in horror. Glenn had returned earlier than expected, a surprise to everyone. "Get up quickly," the little girl whispered, leading Mrs. Mathis into the spacious closet. "Sit here quietly. I'll let you out soon." "Hi, Daddy." Kira leapt into her father's arms, and he lifted her off the floor. "You're early today." "The scheduled surgery was cancelled, and Dr. Hammond told me to go home to my daughter. What have you been up to?" "I was eating. I just got here." Glenn spotted 2 cups of tea in the kitchen and immediately asked his daughter, "Do we have guests?" "A classmate was here." Kira quickly lied, worried about her mistake. Even though her dad was a kind man who saved lives, he didn't allow her to talk to strangers, much less take them to his apartment. After hanging his jacket in the hallway, he noticed a shoe print that clearly did not belong to a child. "Kira, what is this? Who visited us?" Kira knew she couldn't lie any more. Overcome with guilt for trying to deceive him, her face turned red and tears streamed down her cheeks. "Daddy, please don't kick her out. She's good," Kira pleaded, clinging to her father's waist to keep him from moving. "Well, what are you hiding from me?" "Grandma doesn't have a place to live. I brought her here on my own initiative. She didn't force me." Glenn froze as he opened the closet room door. The woman he had been searching for months was staring right at him. It was the same woman who had been in Alexa's car that fateful day, and then vanished as if she had never been there. "You!" Glenn exclaimed, taken aback. "Are you tormenting my family? First, my wife drowned because of you. Now, you're after my daughter?" "What are you talking about? I don't understand what you're accusing me of," responded the scared guest, hoping to exit the apartment as swiftly as possible. She didn't want any trouble or involvement from law enforcement. She regretted 100 times that she had agreed to the offer of the kind-hearted girl. "4 years ago, you got into the car with my wife." Glenn pulled out a printed photo of Mrs. Mathis from his office drawer, taken from that very video camera, and shoved it in her face. "Isn't this you?" "Yes. What's the issue?" The elderly woman looked perplexed now. "You were the last person seen alive with my spouse that day. After that, her car plunged into the river off a bridge. Her body was never found. I spent a considerable amount of time searching for you, thinking you might know something, that you could help me. Alexa's death remains a mystery to our family. No one could explain why she was in that part of town or why she picked you up." Mrs. Mathis began to cry, understanding that she had become entangled in a complex and distressing story. Please forgive me, but I barely remember what happened. It was the first and the last time I met your wife. Please accept my condolences. I was unaware that such a tragedy would befall her. We had been driving together for about 20 minutes. I was cold, so I hitched a ride to the shelter where I spent the night. I don't know anything beyond that." "No? You must know something." Glenn refused to believe her. "You might have heard or noticed something. Only you can reveal what the investigation couldn't. I was hoping you could shed some light on my wife's death. The police suggested it might have been suicide, but that seems unlikely. Alexa desperately wanted a child, and we had Kira." Glenn glanced affectionately at his daughter, who was standing in the doorway, listening to the adults converse. "I swear to you, I know nothing. I didn't harm your wife. May her soul rest in peace. We met by chance. I just happened to be in the right place, and we said goodbye. She definitely didn't seem able to harm herself," Mrs. Mathis explained. "How can you be so sure?" Glenn asked, giving her a tense stare. "Isn't your name Oliver?" Mrs. Mathis inquired, which only confused Glenn. "No. Why?" "She called someone, and called him affectionately Oliver. I immediately assumed he was someone special to her. They only talked for a couple of minutes, but your wife seemed perfectly content. She had a playful tone, and they were discussing an upcoming meeting, so it's unlikely she was planning to commit anything terrible." "She didn't know any Oliver!" Glenn yelled, pounding his fist on the wall. "Daddy!" Kira cried out, causing her father to immediately quiet down. "Honey, go to your room. You don't need to hear this," he told her. Glenn realized that the mysterious stranger with whom Alexa had been speaking during their last encounter was someone connected to her secret life. But how? Glenn had never heard his wife mention this name before. What was she hiding from him? Why had she left home that day? He needed time to unravel these troubling questions. "I'm sorry for yelling at you," he said, looking at Mrs. Mathis. "As winter approaches, where do you plan to stay?" "This isn't my first year living on the streets." The elderly woman waved it off. She was always embarrassed to tell how she had to wander around looking for warm shelter. "Kira would never forgive me if I let you live in this weather. It's raining and the wind is biting. Stay with us tonight." Before going to bed, Glenn thought about Mrs. Mathis. Kira had quickly become friendly with her, and Mrs. Mathis herself seemed pleasant. She didn't smell of cigarettes or alcohol, and although she roamed the city, she didn't appear dangerous. Glenn had needed a new assistant since the last one went on maternity leave. He couldn't keep the apartment clean due to lack of time, and he didn't want to impose adult responsibilities on Kira, thereby depriving her of her childhood. "Mrs. Mathis," he approached the guest the next morning, "I have an offer for you. I need a housekeeper. Would you be interested in the job? You can live here and I'll ensure your pay is fair. Kira is often bored when she's alone. She likes you." "My God!" Mrs. Mathis exclaimed, placing one hand on her face and the other on her heart. "Are you serious?" Yes. There's no need to cry. I'm sincere. There's no catch. It's a win-win situation. It seems both Kira and I need you." "Thank you. You are indeed a kind-hearted man." Glenn provided Mrs. Mathis with money for essential cleaning supplies, household chemicals, and comfortable new clothes. "Don't be shy. Choose what you like. I'll buy the groceries myself. You just need to write me a list for the week," the man said, seeing the sincere gratitude in Mrs. Mathis's eyes. "I will, Glenn." With Mrs. Mathis's arrival, the apartment seemed to regain its soul. Kira was no longer bored in front of the TV waiting for her dad. With Mrs. Mathis, she started going on walks, shopping, and learning to cook simple dishes. Mrs. Mathis, having been a teacher in the past, easily engaged the obedient Kira in her tasks. Glenn was delighted with the newfound coziness, delicious food, and knowing that his daughter was always supervised by an adult. However, he couldn't shake off the name Oliver from his mind. But who was this Oliver? How could he be found? Glenn wasn't sure, but he wasn't going to give up. One day he was having lunch in the clinic. Oliver sat at the neighbouring table. He opened a container he'd brought from home and released a familiar scent that immediately reminded Glenn of Alexa. "Is it supposed to smell like that?" Glenn laughed, recalling a past moment when his fiancée had tried to surprise him with her cooking skills. "Shut up, honey. I accidentally mixed up the seasonings and poured the wrong ones into the pot," Alexa confessed in a pitiful tone, embarrassed by her mistake. "Doesn't sound bad to me," Glenn replied with a mouthful of food. "Let this be your signature recipe. I'm serious, these seasonings work even better. It seems like you're the first to discover this." Alexa smiled and hugged her lover. Reminiscing this scene, Glenn struggled to keep calm and not immediately confront Oliver for an explanation. He knew something for sure, and it was not for nothing that he had been looking at him strangely lately. Glenn felt his colleague's disdainful attitude and mocking glances, as if Oliver knew some secret. Asking Oliver directly for the truth seemed like a bad idea. Glenn knew Oliver would remain silent out of spite, simply to make things more difficult. "Dr. Hammond," he turned to his boss, "may I leave early today? There are no scheduled or urgent tasks." "What's the matter?" "Two surgeons are fleeing from me today," he exclaimed, throwing his hands up in frustration. "They're urgently calling for me at school." "All right, go. We'll manage somehow." Glenn managed to leave at the same time as Oliver. Curious about his actions, Glenn decided to follow him. The pursuit led the man to a supermarket. He didn't dare to follow Oliver inside. It would be suspicious if he saw him in this neighbourhood, where they had never crossed paths before. What Glenn saw next literally nailed him to the seat of his car. Oliver came out of the store, holding the hands of two little twins, and next to them came a woman with a stroller. It was Alexa. She had the same hair, same face, and same gait. Glenn did not know how to react. It was impossible. Is Alexa alive? Is she the mother of Oliver's children? How could this be? Resisting the urge to confront them in the middle of the street, he waited until the whole family got into Oliver's SUV and drove up to a one-story house behind a secure fence. At this point, Glenn's patience ran out. He approached the couple as they were helping the children out of the car. "That's how it is," he said loudly, and the woman shuddered. "Alexa, why did you do this to me? I couldn't find peace. I've been searching for you all this time. How could you leave me like that? You're a monster." "Okay, calm down," Oliver intervened, pushing him away from Alexa. "Don't touch her. Alexa, take the kids and go home. I'll handle this." "No, she stays," Glenn demanded. "I want an explanation. No one is leaving." "I'm sorry, Glenn. It was necessary," Alexa replied, holding her children closely. "You said you were infertile," Glenn exclaimed in disbelief. "What did I do to deserve this?" "Don't talk to her," Oliver threatened. "There's nothing to discuss now. Forget her and let us live in peace. We've been in love for a long time, but my career would have been over if Alexa had just left you for me. You're close with Dr. Hammond. I knew he'd side with you and kick me out of the clinic. It's not a good idea to argue with people like him. I wouldn't have been able to get a decent job anywhere with him against me. That upright man has a keen sense of morality. And instead of making an honest confession, you've made a spectacle of it. You're both just inhuman. You are worth each other, Glenn muttered through clenched teeth. He despised Oliver and was ready to lash out. But his disappointment in Alexa was boundless. I don't believe I ever loved you. It's a good thing we're not together anymore. I wouldn't want a woman like you raising my daughter.
Glenn, listen. Alexa approached him, tears welling in her eyes. I know you've been through hell.
What do you know? I lived in hope that you were alive. I refused to believe you were dead. When there is hope, the heart cannot rest. I exhausted myself, thinking that one day you'd ring the doorbell, and we'd be a family again. And by the way, consider it revenge on you.
Oliver interjected, with a snide tone. He felt no remorse, unlike Alexa. He was indifferent to others' grief and heartache. He only sought what was best for himself, regardless of the cost. Remember our 3rd year at the academy, when you dated Helena? She chose you, even though I saw her first. Are you serious? We dated for only 4 months and she moved to the other side of the country. You don't forget things like that, Oliver responded, still nursing past grievances. Why are you complaining? You have a daughter. We thought of a way to ease your loss of Alexa. You found comfort in her. I feel sorry for your children because they have such ugly genes, Glenn replied. Glenn, forgive me. I didn't want you to suffer like this. You never hurt me, but I was unhappy. And for that reason you made me and our daughter unhappy. Thank you for such generosity, the man snapped back. You'll never understand what we went through. It was difficult to accept your death. You adopted a girl and then just vanished. Didn't she dream of having a mother? Didn't she deserve one? You used her and ran away. Alexa cried loudly, and Glenn turned and walked to his car. He reached his home with a clouded mind. He did not report his wife's scam to the police, although he was tempted to seek revenge. He left it to God's judgment. Glenn, what's going on? Mrs. Mathis asked him when she heard a noise in the hallway. My God, you look awful. It's as if you've been run over by a truck. I'd like to be alone. Did you put Kira to bed? He asked, heading to the bar to get a bottle of cognac. Don't worry, I've taken care of it. We have the lessons ready. Maybe we can come up with something for an appetizer, she asked excitedly. Mrs. Mathis had never seen Glenn in such a state and couldn't imagine what had upset him. No, you shouldn't. Don't worry about me. Good night. Glenn was deeply hurt by Alexa's betrayal. It would have been easier to believe that she was no longer alive, preserving her kind image in his memories. But now she seemed like a callous woman, ready to do whatever it took for her own gain. Glenn's turmoil started to affect his professional life. Although he maintained good relations with his colleagues and patients, his usual spark was missing. He became consumed by his personal problems, neglecting the scientific research he had planned to conduct with his interns. His students were talented, but he lacked the drive to motivate them in their scientific endeavours. Glenn, you're heading down a destructive path, Mrs. Mathis warned, shaking her head. Let her go. Forgive her. Carrying such a weight is unnecessary. I can see it's hurting you. How can I forgive someone who did what she did? I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Look at it this way. Now you're free from someone unreliable. If Alexa is capable of such acts, why stay with her? She could have stayed with you, mothering Kira, and you would never have known how rotten she was inside. God took her away from you. It's a sign. Don't despair. You have everything you need to be happy. A roof over your head, a profession that feeds you, a wonderful daughter. You're right, Mrs. Mathis, but I'm not ready to let it go yet. I'm too angry. You know, I've also been through terrible things. Maybe my story will make you think,
and you'll start to appreciate what you have," Mrs. Mathis said, finally deciding to share something personal. "My daughter Samantha left home at the age of 19. She was a student. She fell in love with a biker. Her father and I disapproved of their relationship. Dennis was a bad influence on her and strained her nerves." Mrs. Mathis sighed sadly, remembering her daughter's vibrant persona. "We forbade them from seeing each other, but did they listen? I begged and cried, but Samantha thought Dennis was the love of her life. He wasn't stable. He moved from town to town. All he had was a motorcycle and the occasional part-time job. He had nothing to offer my daughter, but she ran off with him anyway. We kept in touch by phone for a while. She occasionally texted, assuring me not to worry. But one day, the messages stopped. Since then, we've heard nothing from our Samantha." Mrs. Mathis sobbed, no longer able to hold back her tears. "And you still don't know where she is?" Glenn asked, sincerely perplexed. "Until now, there hasn't been a day that I haven't thought of my daughter. Besides pictures, I have nothing left of her. My spouse couldn't bear the loss and drowned his sorrows in alcohol. He couldn't overcome his grief. I tried to reason with him, but he stubbornly clung to his oblivion. Soon he died." "I'm so sorry," Glenn said, attempting to comfort the elderly woman, but she hadn't finished her story yet. "You never asked me how I ended up on the streets. Thank you for your tact, but I suppose it's time I told you. After my family had ruined, I was devastated. I didn't know whether my daughter was alive or not, but I held on to the hope that she might return. Then I met a young woman with a baby in her arms at the market. She was begging for alms. We started talking. She had run away from her abusive husband. She had no money, no belongings, no home. Her whole family had disowned her when she got married, so she had nowhere to go. The thought that my Samantha could also end up in a strange city without a reliable husband and without means of subsistence moved me. So I let Lauren and her baby stay with me. I didn't mind sharing my home with a single mother because I was alone. Besides, it was unbearable to be in an empty apartment. Their arrival brought life back into my world. Then Lonnie, her alleged brother, arrived. According to their story, he had long desired to extricate his sister from her abusive marriage, but he had no place of his own. I allowed him to stay so Lauren wouldn't worry. She felt safe with him because she feared her husband would find her. Eventually, these scoundrels turned out to be scammers, and they forced me to sign documents transferring the apartment to their use. They threatened me, starved me for days, and kept me in their sights so that I couldn't complain to anyone. Lonnie threatened me with a knife, and I gave in. After they got my signature on the papers, they threw me out on the street. That's how I became homeless." "That's horrific. Why didn't you report them to the police?" "I did, but to no avail. I couldn't prove that I was forced to sign the papers. By law, they became the apartment owners. If there had been a single witness to this violence, I might have stood a chance. As it was, everyone attested that I was close to Lauren, almost considering her my own daughter. It's difficult to believe that such injustice exists in our era." Glenn shook his head. "I'm extremely grateful for your empathy. No one has shown me kindness in a long time. They deemed me a beggar and a layabout. Who would need me at my age? They only hire young girls now, and no one would let me work with children." "You know, Mrs. Mathis, not only did I help you, but you also helped me. Kira is very fond of you, and even calls you grandmother. My relatives live far away. We rarely see each other, and she yearns for the company of loving people. You're a great dad. Don't you dare doubt it. Kira is very lucky to have you. She may have a bad mother, but her father is one in a million." Over time, Glenn became increasingly troubled
by Mrs. Mathis's daughter's story. He yearned to uncover what had happened to her. After speaking with the elderly woman again and meticulously recording every detail, he turned to a private detective. "I'm counting on you very much." Glenn firmly shook the detective's hand after discussing the topic. "You can count on me. The case is not that complicated. I think I can solve it in about a week at most." Filled with hope, Glenn awaited the detective's findings. Soon, the detective called and arranged a meeting, asking Glenn to bring both his daughter and Mrs. Mathis. "This is Archie Bennett, the private detective. Mrs. Mathis, I hired him to shed some light on where your daughter disappeared to," said Glenn, while everyone was seated in the cafe the following day. "You have decided to use my services for a good reason," the detective confirmed, his interest piqued by the situation. "Good afternoon, ladies. Glenn, during my investigation, I discovered that Mrs. Mathis and Kira are grandmother and granddaughter. Samantha gave birth to Kira from Dennis. They separated long before the girl was born, and Samantha tragically died in childbirth due to complications. Please accept my sincere condolences. Since the hospital staff had no contact with Samantha's relatives, Kira was placed in an orphanage, where she lived until Glenn and Alexa adopted her. Mrs. Mathis, I have located your daughter's grave. You can visit her. It's not far, just in the neighbouring town." "My daughter was so close all this time, and I didn't even sense it," Mrs. Mathis sobbed. "She was all alone. She was terrified. The man abandoned her. Samantha, my darling, I'm sorry, my girl. If only I knew where you were, I'd bring you home." "I talked to her entourage," Archie continued, once again drawing attention to himself. He was used to people's reactions like this and could keep his emotions down by now. He had to get the job done before the end. "All of Samantha's friends spoke highly of her and you. They said she always spoke well of her family and missed you a lot. She loved you. She was too scared to come home pregnant. She felt guilty for not heeding your warning about Dennis and was too ashamed to face you after she left." "We would have welcomed her back. We would have helped. A child is always a blessing. Kira, you're my true granddaughter. God, I'm so relieved." It took a while for the three of them to recover from the shock of the sudden news. A few more months went by, and the family slowly got used to the shocking news from the past. One day, Glenn came to a meeting and could not believe his eyes when he saw the new co-worker of the clinic. "Helena, how did you get here?" "Hello," she said quietly, trying not to draw the attention of her new co-workers. "I'm back in my native land." Glenn immediately noticed that Helena did not have a wedding ring. During his student years, Glenn felt a strong attraction towards her. She was not only physically appealing, but they also shared similar views on life, tastes and interests. Their friendly relations swiftly evolved into an awkward romance, a period of his life that Glenn would always remember fondly, without any regrets. Before lunch, Glenn found Helena and asked with an awkward smile, "Why don't we check out the bistro across the street? The food there's great, and there aren't too many of our co-workers there." "I'm all for it." At first, their conversation came out kind of awkward. They both mentally revisited their past, reflecting on their previous closeness, and now fate had brought them together again. "I didn't know you worked here too," Helena confessed. "Does that embarrass you? Don't you think we can maintain our distance?" Glenn responded, suddenly flustered. "No, that's not what I meant. I'm pleased to see you. We had a good parting, there's nothing to worry about. We're both professionals, after all." "I thought you'd choose general surgery, but you became a cardiologist. A very respectful profile." Glenn smiled. They spent the remainder of their time sharing stories about their respective family life failures.
I also went through a divorce, if you can call it that, Glenn confessed, hesitant to admit that Alexa had left him. My daughter is the same age as your Toby. Perhaps we could meet this weekend. Take them for a walk.
That would be nice. The city has changed so much over the years. I hardly recognise the neighbourhoods.
Helena laughed. You don't have to worry. You won't get lost with us. Kira is independent and goes to school, to the tutor, and to friends by herself. It took some time to agree on a weekend, but Glenn eagerly anticipated meeting her outside of work. After their first weekend walk, the dynamic between Helena and Glenn at work changed. They tried to maintain a professional distance, but they found themselves drawn to each other like magnets. Even if they happened to cross paths in the corridor, they couldn't help but pause to chat for a few minutes. Soon, the four of them began meeting every weekend, spending almost the entire day together.
Dad, do you like Helena?
Whispered Kira into her father's ear as he watched the woman play badminton with Toby. What makes you say that? He responded, surprised by his daughter's directness.
Well, you're looking at her in a special way. I've never seen that before.
I guess you're right, Glenn admitted, playfully flicking his finger on his daughter's nose. Yes, I do like her. How do you feel about that? He asked cautiously. They had never had such a conversation before. Glenn had resigned himself to a life without romantic love and hadn't thought he could fall again.
Kira shrugged her shoulders.
I don't know. There's nothing wrong with that, is there? And you won't be jealous of me?
I like Helena, and I think she looks at you the same way.
After their conversation, Glenn felt much better. He had been considering having an important conversation with Helena, but as single parents they both needed to prioritise their children's interests. How would you feel about meeting alone, without our little gang? Glenn asked, looking Helena straight in the eyes as they were parting.
You're right.
No need to beat around the bush. It's time to admit that this is more than just a friendly outing. We're adults now, she replied with a smile. I like your answer, Glenn responded. Despite their efforts to be discreet, many at the clinic began to notice that they were always arriving for shifts together, exchanging glances. Occasionally, Glenn would place his hand on Helena's waist, and she wouldn't resist. Hey, you! Are you even going to invite me to the wedding? Dr. Hammond interjected, trying to get the attention of the couple who were already heading for the exit. Glenn smiled. How did you know? We're really getting married. But we still need to decide on a date, Helena added. That's right, agreed Dr. Hammond and winked. So, I wait an invitation. Helena and Toby were often guests at Glenn's home. Mrs. Mathis approved of Glenn's choice, describing his beloved as a decent, economical, and loyal woman. And she is also the best cardiac surgeon in the neighbourhood, Toby declared proudly, boasting about his talented mother. That's very appropriate, little one, Mrs. Mathis laughed, patting the boy's head. You must grow up to be as smart as your parents. First, you'll be proud of their accomplishments, and then they'll be proud of yours. After dinner, Glenn sent Mrs. Mathis off to rest, assuring her that they could handle the kitchen clean-up. Everyone's asleep. It's just us, Helena murmured, embracing her lover from behind. Don't do that, or I'll break the plate inadvertently, Glenn responded, laughing softly. We need to consider expanding our living space. Do you prefer an apartment or a house? Let's look near the clinic to shorten our commute. And consider the school's location. Oh, more logistics to think about. Well, then, I suggest we keep the ceremony modest. Glenn turned and kissed his beloved. I love you. You always know my desires, Helena smiled. In a brightly lit banquet hall, adorned with exquisite white flowers, the newlyweds, in the company of their relatives and friends, celebrated this wonderful event. Now, Glenn was certain of his happiness. He knew
he could face any adversity with Helena. She would always support him, and he would protect her from any hardship. Kate lay on the bed, gazing at the ceiling, her body partially covered by a sheet, and a soft smile gracing her lips. She was content with her life, and yearned to share this joy with the world. She loved her husband dearly, but she always held back her emotions around him, as he disapproved of excessive displays of them. Turning her head, Kate looked at her husband. His attention was fixed on a painting hanging across the room, deep in thought. She affectionately asked, "What are you thinking about, my love?" Caught off guard, Damien shrugged and answered absent-mindedly, "Oh, nothing really." However, Kate could tell he was troubled by something. She got closer to him and rested her head on his chest. "I can tell you're thinking about something. Won't you tell me?" Damien sighed. His wife was persistent, and he knew she wouldn't stop until he responded. He glanced at her, then back at the painting, before speaking slowly. "I think we need a bigger apartment." Kate immediately straightened up and looked him in the eyes. She was taken aback. They had discussed this a year ago, but Damien had been against it. Their current apartment suited them perfectly, so why the need for a new one? Of course, Kate hinted that it would be time for them to have children already, but her husband was not yet ready. "Do you really mean it, Damien? Are you serious?" Kate asked, hopeful. Damien shrugged his shoulders. "I'm not a fool. I understand everything. Yes, I think it's time for us to think about expanding our living space, given the planned changes, but please, no childish talk until we sort out the apartment." Kate snuggled up to her husband again and showered him with kisses. No, I promise, no baby talk," she assured. Damien sighed and smiled faintly. He saw that Kate could barely contain her excitement. It was quite obvious. If Damien had let her, she would have screamed with joy, run around the house, and jumped on the bed. However, he deliberately did not allow her to express her feelings. He liked to control her. He felt important in her life as long as she obeyed. He kissed her on the forehead and replied, "Let's go to sleep. We'll discuss everything later. This weekend we'll talk about it and come up with a plan. Good night, dear." Hearing his words, Kate frowned slightly. Should she wait a whole week to discuss everything? Was he kidding? At that moment, she was ready to talk all night long. Kate knew that if he said that, he wouldn't even talk to her about the apartment for a week. He might have done it deliberately to make her suffer, but Kate didn't resent him for that. She was too fond of him to pay attention to such trifles. He loves her. That's the most important thing. Their feelings have been tested for years, and nothing can separate them. They'll always be together. Damien turned away from Kate and began to drift off to sleep. Kate looked at the painting, remembering the past. It seemed like an eternity ago, even though it had only been a couple of years. They met when Kate had just graduated from high school and Damien from university. To her, he seemed like an adult who had a job, while she was a naive girl dreaming of the prince. Damien became her prince. He invited her to dinner in restaurants, drove her around in his car, and gave her luxurious gifts. He was somewhat restrained, requiring Kate to restrain her emotions too. She admired him and fell head over heels in love with him. After a year of dating, Damien proposed to her. Kate was in college at the time. For her birthday, he gave her an expensive diamond ring and a chic dinner at a restaurant. Her friends were jealous that she got such a catch, a mature man who would go to the ends of the earth for her. They got married. The ceremony was modest because Damien didn't want to spend too much on a lavish celebration. After the wedding, they went on a trip to Europe, which delighted Kate. She had never left her homeland before and believed that she was lucky not only to marry for love, but also to secure a promising future for herself. The couple bought an apartment together, sharing the costs. Kate's parents helped her with her share, and Damien used the inheritance from his grandmother. Kate, after graduating from college, found a good job. Her income was almost equal to her husband's. They were thinking about starting a family,
but Damien didn't think that they were ready yet. Children are a huge responsibility. We need to think through all the aspects and plan carefully. The tragedy occurred when Kate's parents died. Her mother struggled with a serious illness and died of cancer within 6 months. Her father died of a heart attack 3 months later, unable to cope with his grief. Kate's grief was immense. Thanks to her husband's support, she survived this terrible stroke of fate. The loss of both parents strengthened her attachment to her husband, who became her only support. Damien was her only family now. Kate had a cousin, Donna, who lived in another city. As children, Donna would often visit during vacations, but life took them in different directions over time. They maintained a relationship, exchanging holiday and birthday greetings, but their interaction was limited. Kate sold the apartment she inherited from her parents and deposited the money in the bank. If Damien contributed a little more, the sale of their current 1-bedroom apartment would afford them a spacious 2- or even 4-bedroom apartment. This would allow them to start a family. The thought of becoming a mother brought Kate to tears. She touched her flat belly and smiled at the prospect. She couldn't wait for it to happen. She was already 30 years old. It was time to have a baby. Kate closed her eyes and sighed as she began to drift off to sleep. Throughout the night, she had strange dreams filled with children reaching out to her, begging her to save them. Yet as soon as she extended her hands, they vanished. Next, she found herself in complete darkness, locked in a small room. Despite her frantic knocking and screaming for help, no one came and she woke up. The unsettling remnants of the dream lingered until morning, but then all memories of the nightmare evaporated. Days passed, and it was finally Friday. Kate discovered a flat tire on her car that morning, so she took a cab to work. After work, she planned to visit her favourite pastry shop to buy Damien's beloved cupcake. The shop wasn't far, but she decided to walk, enjoying the beautiful weather and her excellent mood. Today was the day she would discuss their plans, including buying a new home and outlining their next steps. Kate had been walking around for 20 minutes when she turned into a quiet alleyway. This path, lined with private houses and devoid of high-rise buildings, served as a shortcut. She adored this street for its tranquility and the absence of cars. The houses were exceptionally beautiful, and she dreamt of owning one of these houses. To her, even the air on this street seemed different, cleaner and fresher. Taking a deep breath, she smiled at the thought of owning a house instead of an apartment. They could create a cosy yard to enjoy quiet evenings, engaging in pleasant conversations. Once their baby was born, Kate envisioned spending endless hours outside, strolling near the house with the baby. She imagined Damien building a playground and sandbox for their child, providing endless fun. Kate strolled down the street, lost in dreams of the future. She paused before a seemingly uninhabited house. It was large, majestic, with sizable windows. It wasn't new, but its charm remained undiminished. Kate looked at the house for a few minutes, and then she realized that if someone saw her, it could raise questions due to her suspicious actions. She quickly glanced around, relieved to find the street deserted. She resumed her leisurely stroll, reaching an intersection. Despite the absence of traffic lights, a crosswalk was present. In all her time spent walking here, not a single car had passed by. The tranquility was palpable. Kate concluded that this was indeed the ideal neighbourhood to reside in. The woman smiled thoughtfully and then began to cross the road. Suddenly, she heard the squeal of brakes. Time seemed to slow, each second dragging like thick honey. Initially, Kate didn't know where the sound was coming from, but then she realised it was right beside her. Frozen in the middle of the road, she turned her head to the left. The last thing she saw was a bright yellow car bearing down on her. She even managed to catch a glimpse of the driver, a woman with fiery red hair and a terrified expression. Her eyes and mouth were wide open, likely screaming in fear. Before losing consciousness, she felt an overwhelming sadness and fear.
which she assumed was a precursor to death. Then everything went black.
What's the next step? We can't just leave things as they are. We have to act.
Kate heard her husband's voice, but it sounded muffled, as if she had cotton in her ears. She felt so unwell that she didn't even want to open her eyes. She wanted to be alone and considered telling Damien to move his phone conversation to another room, but her tongue wouldn't cooperate.
I've told you there's nothing I can do. I suggest you accept that. If you continue to create a scandal, I'll have to have you removed. Don't yell at me. I'm just doing my job, which doesn't include tolerating disrespect, a strange voice said.
Kate furrowed her brow in confusion. She didn't recognize the voice. Was she ill? Had Damien called a doctor? Why was her body in pain? Why couldn't she muster the strength to even open her eyes? What was happening? She lifted her hand without opening her eyes, touching her lips. They felt so parched. She thought she couldn't speak. She's awake. Kate, can you hear me? Say you can hear me. It's me, Damien. I can hear you fine, but I can't talk loudly. Why do I feel so unwell? Whispered Kate. She felt Damien grasp her hand. You've been in an accident, dear, he said gently. Suddenly, Kate remembered. A brief flash of memory, and she recalled being hit by a car at a crosswalk. It felt like it was yesterday, or maybe a few days ago. She struggled to grasp how much time had passed. She opened her eyes, but darkness still surrounded her. What was happening? Why is it so dark? Did the lights go out? She asked softly. The only response was silence. Kate could feel a sense of unease creeping in. She asked again. Damien? What's happening? Why is it so dark? What occurred? Please don't stay silent. It's frightening me. Where am I? Why is it dark? Her voice was raising in volume, and the onset of panic was evident. Damien squeezed her hand and said, Calm down, Kate. We'll fix it. This is only temporary. We'll be right by your side. Don't worry. You're temporarily blind, but your eyes are perfectly fine. Don't worry, Kate. We'll find the best doctors, and they will diagnose the problem. You'll see again. Everything will return to normal, I promise. Just stay calm. Damien's words struck Kate's heart like a stone. Overwhelmed by panic, she felt as if she were about to perish from terror. She attempted to get out of bed, clutching the sheets and pushing Damien's hands away. Opening her eyes wide, she realized she couldn't see anything. This terrifying sensation made her feel dizzy, though she couldn't be certain, since she couldn't see anything. She needs to be sedated. Hold her hand. I'll do it. Damien held his wife, who was struggling with her unexpected state, and immediately Kate felt weakness seep into her. Despite this, she continued to cry and convulse in her husband's arms, her strength slowly ebbing away. As she teetered on the edge of consciousness, she heard the doctor speak with her husband. It's shock. She'll get better. The initial reaction is always the most intense. She'll overcome this. Everyone finds a way to cope when there are no other options, the doctor said in a steady voice. But how? How is this possible? She barely has any physical injuries. How could she lose her sight so suddenly, from a single blow? Can such a thing really happen? Damien's voice was filled with worry and fear. When Kate awoke, she was still under the influence of the injection. Damien was by her side. She calmly requested that he update her on the recent events. It was revealed that Kate had been in the hospital for 2 weeks, a fact that shocked her. She had assumed that the accident had occurred just a day or 2 prior, yet she had been in the hospital for a full 14 days. The most unsettling part was that there were no witnesses to the accident. No one had seen it happen, nor did anyone know how long she had been lying on the road. Doctors estimated that she was unconscious for approximately 10 to 15 minutes before being found. A passing driver saw her and called an ambulance. Miraculously, she suffered no severe injuries, only some bruises, a broken elbow and a cracked rib. However, she had hit her head quite hard. After an examination, Kate was diagnosed with a moderate concussion, which had led to an unforeseen consequence. She lost her vision. As Damien relayed this information, she held his hand tightly, trying to stay composed. She knew Damien disliked emotional outbursts, and from his calm voice, it was clear he wouldn't appreciate any tears or screams. In her confusion, she would occasionally open her eyes and turn towards Damien, only to be reminded of her blindness. Each time she would quickly shut her eyes again, striving for calm. Once Damien shared all the details, she attempted to gather her strength. What was she to do next? Damien informed her that she wouldn't be kept in the hospital any longer since she didn't have severe injuries and the immediate danger had passed. A doctor who specializes in such injuries is coming today. I've paid a substantial amount for his examination and advice. Don't worry. I hope he can guide us in restoring your sight. I trust that you will recover. It must be so, dear. Kate also hoped for the same, feeling that otherwise life had no meaning. The professor conducted a consultation, but his words were far from comforting. If he had at least taken Damien aside and spoken privately, Kate could have retained a slither of hope. But he delivered his verdict in her presence. I'm sorry, but your prognosis is grave. Your eyesight won't be restored. Unfortunately, such injuries are common, and their impact on the human body can be unpredictable. I can say with confidence that in your case, there's nothing that can be done, unless we could replace your brains, which sadly is impossible. Medicine hasn't progressed that far yet. I know that you'll seek the best doctors, that you want a second opinion. You're right to do so, but I assure you that any doctor will tell you the same thing I just did. My advice to you is to accept everything and move forward. Many people lead even more fulfilling lives after vision loss. You are the only one who can handle this. But remember, you're not alone. Your husband is there to help and support you. Accept as soon as possible that you will be blind forever and start living by the new rules. If needed, I can provide contacts of specially trained individuals who can help you adapt to your new environment. They can teach you to navigate at home. Many people even learn to get around independently without assistance. As a young woman, believe me, you can learn this. While it may take a few years, it is certainly possible. Damien and Kate listened silently to the doctor, whose words extinguished their smallest hope for a cure. When the doctor left, Kate could no longer contain her emotions. She didn't throw a tantrum or rage, but she cried so bitterly that anyone who heard her also had tears in their eyes. Kate mourned her broken life, her happy future, her plans and everything that pleased her in life. She couldn't see anything now. She had become blind. Why should she live? She couldn't do anything anymore. No more cooking, no more going to work or shopping, no more putting on makeup, no more smiling at her husband, looking at his face. All the things that used to give her pleasure, the most ordinary things that she used to not pay much attention to, they are all out of her reach now. She will never be complete again. She will grow old and not even know what she looks like. Her husband will see her change. She won't even be able to care for herself because she won't see the change in her appearance. It's horrible. It's a nightmare. No, she doesn't want to live like that. She'd rather die than live like this. Kate remained in the hospital for a few more days until her doctor deemed that she no longer required medical attention. She was discharged and returned to what was once her familiar home. Despite being surrounded by familiar objects and walls, she felt neither calm nor peace. Her home had become a labyrinth where she navigated in complete darkness. For the first day after her return, Kate was too frightened to move. She appreciated that Damien took a week off work to help her adjust to her new condition. Damien chose not to hire specialists, despite knowing that they could provide assistance. After contacting several,
he found their services expensive, which they couldn't afford at the time. Kate was unable to work, and the future was uncertain. Damien had spent a portion of their savings on Kate's medical needs, including doctors, medications, diagnostic tests, and consultations. Now Damien was the sole breadwinner and providing for their living expenses, and Kate's continued medication needs fell to him alone. As a result, he decided to forego further medical specialists and assist Kate himself. Damien spent a week helping Kate adjust to her new circumstances. He guided her around their home, teaching her to identify objects by touch. He showed her how to use the shower and toilet, and he oriented her to the layout of their home. He encouraged her to navigate independently. Kate was also haunted by a strange dream she had had a few days before the accident. The dream was of children in a dark, silent room with a locked door. She felt despair, consternation, bitterness, and fear. Now, in her current situation, she understood the dream as a warning. Could she have averted this disaster? Had she interpreted that dream correctly? It's uncertain. Perhaps this is her destiny, unchangeable. Kate cried every night. Her husband comforted her as much as he could, but by the end of his days off, he told her, "Kate, you must stop crying so much. I can't comfort you indefinitely. I have work on Monday. Your sobs keep me awake at night. You don't give yourself or me any respite. We can't continue like this." "Why should we continue? I'm losing my mind and you're asking me to calm down. How can I calm down when I'll never be the same again? I can't accept it," Kate replied tearfully, while Damien continued to console her. Time passed. Damien returned to work. After a few sleepless nights, he began sleeping in the living room. Kate worried that they would never be as close as before, and promised Damien she would stop crying. He purchased calming pills for her, which provided some relief, and she even began sleeping through the night. 3 months post-accident, they made love for the first time, an unusual experience for Kate due to the complete darkness. She tried to imagine it as a simple power outage. Despite their success, she couldn't shake the feeling that Damien was treating her differently. She tried to dismiss these thoughts, but it was challenging. One day, Kate asked Damien about their plan to buy a bigger apartment. "Kate, are you out of your mind? Why do we need a bigger place now? A new home is a new space. How will you navigate an unfamiliar environment when you can barely move around our current apartment? You won't be able to walk a step. It'll take you a year to memorize where everything is, and I don't have time for that. I have to work. I'm trying to feed us while you're at home." This response left Kate nearly choking with indignation. "Why do you say that? Am I to blame for what happened to me? Am I at home by choice? I'd gladly work 24 hours a day if I could. And you're telling me that I'm not doing anything? Shame on you." "I'm not ashamed because I didn't say anything reprehensible. I stated the facts as they are. I didn't mean to offend you. I was simply explaining the current situation. We can't afford a new home right now. It's wise to conserve our savings. We don't know what could happen. Having a financial cushion is beneficial. I wasn't trying to insult or upset you." Kate clenched her fists in frustration, leaning back in her chair. She yearned to look into her husband's eyes, to read his gaze, to understand his feelings, but that was impossible. She tried to regain her composure, but couldn't. She felt tears roll down her cheeks and whispered softly, "What about the baby? We wanted a baby, didn't we? We planned to buy an apartment so we'd have room for the baby. But how can we find room for a baby in this apartment? It's barely big enough for the 2 of us." Silence followed. Kate regretted for the umpteenth time that she couldn't see her husband's face. What was he thinking? Was he looking at her or away? "What child? Have you lost your mind along with your eyesight? How can we even discuss having a child if you're blind? I'm unsure whether you're laughing at me or mocking me. Sure, you might be able to have a baby, that's understandable. But what happens after that? How will you care for it? You're blind, Kate. You can't see anything. If you've forgotten, you can't do anything independently. Perhaps you could feed the baby, but only if I assist you. You're incapable of anything else. So what's next? Do I quit my job to take care for the child while you're satisfied that you've fulfilled your duty? What's in it for me? To pause my life with a blind wife and a young child? You definitely need a psychiatrist. Kate, you have a significant issue if you even dare to consider having a child. Kate was taken aback by everything she had heard. Damien was harsh and furious as he hurled those unpleasant words at her. Eventually, he stormed out of the kitchen, and Kate heard the front door slam shut. He left without even mentioning when he would return. However, Kate was not particularly concerned about that at the moment. She tried to process what she had heard. So, her dream of a complete family would never become a reality. She would never become a mother or have the chance to cradle a child in her arms. She was devastated, feeling as though she had nothing left. She sat at the table, clutching the dried night mask she had pulled over her eyes. No longer crying, she was immersed in her own darkness. It wasn't long before Damien returned. He approached her and sat down next to her. Kate, I apologize. I was too harsh and said things I shouldn't have. I've reconsidered and I want to... He was cut off by Kate. The fault is mine. I've been foolish. My blindness has changed me, but I won't behave like this anymore. I'll strive to be more sensible, to stop saying things that upset you. I don't want to argue, because you're my only confidant. You're the only one who cares for me. I don't want to lose you. The idea of a baby is absurd. You're right. Having a child is not feasible. I entirely agree with you. I promise to avoid such foolish remarks in the future. Please forgive me. Initially, Damien was taken aback, but then he smiled and said, Yes, dear, that's precisely what I meant. Let's not fight any more. We're facing tough times. If we argue, we'll harm our relationship, and I don't want that. I love you. We'll get through this, but we need to stick together. The baby will only complicate things. We can't manage him in our current state. I'm pleased you understand this. It shows your common sense is still intact. Let's move on. I'm hungry. Are you? I'll prepare something. Kate hid her tears and smiled. Despite Damien's emotional distance, she tried to hold on, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. She had hoped they would overcome the difficulties together, but that wasn't the case. A gap of misunderstanding began to form between her and her husband. Kate feared it wouldn't end well, and it didn't. From that day forward, they grew further apart. For Kate, change was impossible. She couldn't even leave without support. Damien's behaviour also changed. He began to stay late at work more frequently, or perhaps he was somewhere else entirely. Kate couldn't ascertain the truth. Feeling bored at home, she asked Damien to teach her how to use the telephone. After some thought, her husband purchased a push-button phone for her. He programmed all the necessary numbers and instructed her on how to use it. Among the numbers, she insisted on having her cousins. They had only spoken once since an accident, with her cousin offering help and her refusing. Equipped with the phone, Kate could now call Damien any time, which somewhat eased her loneliness. She wore the phone on a lanyard around her neck and frequently phoned Damien at work. Initially, Damien answered all her calls. However, he soon started to resent the constant interruptions. Don't you realize you're distracting me? Did I buy you this phone just to have you bother me all the time? Please, Kate, stop calling me so often, otherwise I'll be disgusted to come home. Sometimes I already feel that way. Upon hearing those words, Kate felt a wave of sorry for herself. However, she stopped calling her husband incessantly, only reaching out when necessary, or when he was late from work. When she questioned his late arrivals, Damien would respond angrily and irritably. "Why are you asking? I have to work twice as hard. Your disability pension is barely enough. I work late because I get paid for the extra hours. Don't bother me with your questions. Surely you understand how difficult this is for me." Afterwards, Kate refrained from asking more questions. A week later, Damien was so long away that she got worried and wanted to call him. She grew anxious and decided to call him. He took an unusual amount of time to pick up the phone, and when he finally did, his voice brimmed with irritation. "Why are you calling?" he asked. "I was wondering when you're coming home. It's 10 o'clock at night. You've never been this late before. Is everything okay?" Kate asked with concern. "Nothing's wrong. You're just distracting me. If something had happened, I would have called you. I'm fine. I'll be home around midnight," Damien replied sternly. Kate almost calmed down after hearing his voice, but when Damien ended the conversation, he did not immediately disconnect the cell phone, and Kate distinctly heard a woman's soft laughter, followed by her words. "Has she called again? Forget about her. Come to me." Kate gripped her push-button phone tightly. Was there another woman with her husband? Wasn't he supposed to be at work? Suddenly, Kate realized exactly where Damien was. He had likely been deceiving her for quite some time, spending his evenings with another woman. This woman had replaced Kate, and now Damien didn't even want to return to his blind wife. Perhaps Kate had lost her appeal, and Damien was repulsed by her, seeking solace in a young and beautiful girl who pampered him and showed him pity. Kate couldn't wait for Damien to return home. As soon as he stepped through the door, she confronted him with her suspicions. She was prepared for anything but his cold indifference. "I don't understand. What's your problem with me? What's wrong with you?" "What's wrong? You have to be joking. You're likely cheating on me, and I'm left to agonize over it. Who was that woman? Your partner? Your co-worker? Tell me!" Kate exclaimed loudly. "Ah, so that's what you're referring to. Are you certain you want to know everything? Well, all right. I don't want to keep anything from you. I've done nothing to be ashamed of. Yes, I spend time with another woman, and I believe I need it. At home, I have a blind wife who can't feed me, can't take care of me, and can't show me affection in a normal way. Do you think this is easy for me? I've endured it for so long, but it's simply unbearable. I can't sacrifice my life just to care for you. I'm already fed up with everything. Life didn't prepare me for this. I want to come home and relax, see a beautiful, well-groomed wife, enjoy a nice dinner, not this. I come home and I have to take care of you, feed you, help you shower. If only you knew what you look like now. Your hair is grey and unkempt. Your eyebrows are ungroomed. You're pale and you don't have a manicure. It's simply horrifying. You don't make me want to touch you. That's why I have to visit a woman after work who takes care of me and rejuvenates me." Kate was engulfed by a wave of rage and indignation. "You have no right to hurt and deceive me in this way, let alone discuss it so openly. I won't allow you to torment me." Then Damien laughed, a sound so unpleasant that Kate was covered in goosebumps. "What are you going to do? Kick me out? Go ahead, try. But I'm telling you now, you won't succeed. I'm not leaving. This isn't just your apartment. And I'm going to live here doing whatever I want. And you can't stop me. Who are you? Just a helpless woman who can't do anything without me. You're dependent on me. You can't even step outside this apartment without my help. If you don't like it, you can leave. I'm not stopping you. But how far will you get, my dear? That's it. You'll stay home and wait for me to return from work. I'll come whenever I please. I'll feed and bathe you. I'll clean your dishevelled hair and take care of cooking and cleaning. You will silently smile and thank me. Understand? If you ever mention being unhappy again, you'll regret it. You'll go a week with only dry rations, or I'll leave you alone for several nights, making you feel so lonely that you'll wish for my presence." "No," Kate murmured quietly. "What did you say?" Damien frowned, taken aback by her interruption. "I said, no, I won't tolerate you sleeping with another woman. I refuse to live like that. So, what if I'm blind? I'm your wife, do you hear me? Or have you forgotten? Some unfortunate accident took my sight, but I'm still the same person. I simply can't see. I'm trying to learn everything possible to lessen your burden, but I need time and your support. How can you provide that support if you're not home? No, I won't tolerate your infidelity." Kate's voice, though soft, was firm. Damien eyed her in bewilderment. How dare she speak to him that way? She was nothing. "Ah, so you're not satisfied? Well then, good riddance. Leave. I'm not stopping you, nor will I try to. Why don't you say something? Pack your things and go. The door is open, dear." Kate stood still. After a moment she said quietly, "Fine, I won't be here tomorrow." She carefully made her way out of the kitchen and into the bedroom. She sat on the bed feeling numb. She felt so vulnerable that words couldn't capture it. There were no tears because she didn't even feel like crying. She just wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground, to leave without a trace, so that no one would even remember her. Where would she go? She had said she wouldn't be here tomorrow, but where could she go if she didn't leave the house? Why did she say that? Because she couldn't stay with him any longer. Kate heard Damien taking a shower, and she thought of one person who could help her. She reached for the phone hanging around her neck, gripping it tightly. After fumbling for the right button, she dialed a specific number and held the phone to her ear. What if they were asleep and didn't answer? After a few seconds, she heard a slightly sleepy voice. "Yes, I'm listening." "Hello, Donna, this is Kate. Please excuse my late call." "Kate? Did something happen? Is it something with Damien?" "No, there's nothing wrong with Damien. Donna, I need your help. I'm not in danger, but I need help. I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to call." "No problem. What's going on? I'll help you however I can. Tell me quickly. What do you need?" "Donna, could you please help me escape? I need to leave Damien immediately. You're my only hope. I apologize for the late call again. I'm just at a loss." "When should I come? Is it urgent? I can catch a train tomorrow morning and be there by noon. Is that okay? Great. Don't worry, I'm on vacation. You're not inconveniencing me. See you tomorrow." After hanging up, Kate sighed with relief, her hand over her racing heart. Everything would be okay. Donna would arrive tomorrow. With Damien at work, they could pack in peace. She never wanted to return here. She just needed her documents and bank card. She had a bank account with money from the sale of her parents' apartment. Financially, she was secure. Everything would be fine. 10 minutes later, Damien entered the bedroom with an arrogant snort. He made it clear that he dismissed her words as insignificant, believing she wouldn't go anywhere. He was convinced she couldn't even take a step without him, comparing her to a blind and defenseless kitten. "I'll sleep in the living room. I'll give you a few days to cool down and dispel those delusions of leaving," he said. "Once you apologize for your behavior and accept that I have another woman, then I'll treat you kindly again, and all will be well. Good night." With that, Damien took his pillow and plaid and left. Kate listened to his speech in silence, not responding. She clenched her fingers tightly, the pain a reflection of her turmoil. She resolved to never let anyone treat her this way again. Yes, she was blind, but she could still feel, love, and even hate if necessary. Kate spent half the night sorting through her clothes, identifying each item by touch.
By 3 in the morning, she had packed everything she planned to take with her. When Donna arrived, they would gather the necessary documents, and Kate would leave the apartment that once brought her so much joy, but from which she now yearned to escape. The next day, Donna arrived around 1 in the afternoon. She hugged her cousin without asking what had transpired. Donna helped Kate pack her suitcase and located all the documents that Kate had listed. She placed everything in a separate folder and put it in the suitcase. After a moment's thought, Kate asked her, "Do you think I should take all my jewellery, or would it be better to leave them for him?" Donna frowned and replied firmly, "I don't know what's happened to you yet. It doesn't seem like things are going well, but you can take whatever you want, and no one will judge you for it." Kate sighed and instructed her cousin, "Then take the jewellery box in the closet." Once they had finished packing, Donna helped Kate put on her sneakers and handed her sunglasses. The woman stood in the hallway for a moment before Kate firmly stated, "We need to leave as soon as possible. I can't stay here any longer." And with that they departed. Donna hailed a cab and they headed to the train station. At the station, Donna purchased 2 tickets to her city. Their train was scheduled to leave in 2 hours. During that time, the women sat in the station cafe, where Kate shared her story. Throughout the conversation, Donna found herself wiping away tears. She felt a deep sympathy for her cousin, who had endured so much, and she was determined to help. She didn't regret coming. Kate needed someone to guide her through this difficult time, someone to teach her how to survive in a world that doesn't always offer help and support to those with disabilities. Donna decided then and there she would be that person. She had no intention of spending her life as Kate's faithful assistant. Instead, she planned to teach Kate how to manage everyday tasks that posed no challenge to a sighted person. This began their life together. Donna had a 2-bedroom apartment courtesy of her wealthy ex-husband. They had married young and for love, but the love quickly dissipated. The marriage lasted 3 years, followed by a divorce, in which he bought her an apartment in exchange for her not claiming anything else. Thankfully, they had no children. Donna's vacation had just begun, with 3 weeks of rest ahead. Starting the day after her arrival, she began to work with Kate. Kate was initially shocked. She had planned to spend some time mourning her late and faded family life, but Donna didn't allow her that luxury. "If you expect to lie on the bed from morning until evening, you are wrong. Yes, I'm sorry that you're blind, but you have to realize that either you will become strong and continue your life under the new rules, or you'll just turn into an old sourpuss who will curse everyone. I felt sorry for you, but I'm not going to feel sorry for you anymore. I have 3 weeks to teach you to be more or less on your own, and I demand that you pull yourself together and work hard, not lying on the bed all snotty," Donna declared. Kate understood. She had to live by her cousin's rules. Donna was providing her shelter, so it was better not to upset or disappoint her. They both prepared to get down to work. The first night Donna spent there, Kate had a strange dream, similar to the one she had before the accident. She found herself locked in a dark room once more. As she stumbled in the darkness, she discovered the familiar door. She yanked the handle, but it was locked yet again. Suddenly, she heard a rustling sound downstairs. Crouching down, she felt the floor with her hands and found a small key. Could this be the key to the door? Rising, she located the door's keyhole, inserted the key, and to her amazement, the door swung open. A blinding light forced her to shield her eyes with her hand. The final image she remembered before waking up was a dark-haired, dark-eyed man extending his arms towards her. The following morning, the girls began their work. Donna guided her around the house from dawn until dusk for several days, pausing only for meals. By the end of the 3rd day, Kate was exhausted. However, she had successfully mapped out the entire house in her mind, including the layout of all the rooms and every object within. Donna had taught Kate to navigate her surroundings by counting her steps. which helped her avoid bumping into walls. She showed her how to use the shower and toilet, brush her teeth, wash her hair, and use the hairdryer. Over the course of 3 days, Kate learned to navigate the kitchen. Donna showed her how to use the microwave, heat her food, fill the kettle, and wash dishes. Kate became self-sufficient in feeding herself and cleaning up. In 2 weeks, Donna taught her skills that Damien hadn't. Instead of doing chores for Kate, Donna empowered her to manage on her own. She helped Kate realize her self-reliance and the possibility of entertaining herself at home. Kate learned to use the vacuum cleaner, clean the floors and dust. This kept her occupied and made her feel alive and productive. Donna saved the most challenging task for the final week. When she shared her plan with her cousin, it was the first time Kate felt bold enough to disagree. "No, I don't want to. It's out of the question. Do you want me to die of fright on the spot? No, I can't do that," she exclaimed, feeling powerless. "But Kate, you understand that you can't continue like this forever, right? You have to get used to the idea that I won't always be around. You need to conquer your fear. You've seen how it's done in movies, haven't you?" Donna calmly continued, trying to convince her. "That's in the movies. Everything seems so easy there. But this is real life. It's entirely different. I can't, Donna. I really can't." "How can you even know if you haven't even tried? Give it a shot. Practice for a week, and then tell me if you can't. I'm not asking for something impossible, just for you to try. What if you can do it? What if you end up liking it?" Donna tried persuading her all evening, but Kate was adamant. Just when Donna was about to give in and admit defeat, Kate suddenly agreed. "Okay, fine, I'll try. But promise me, if after a week I tell you I don't want to anymore, you won't force me, okay?" "Okay. Yes, I promise." Donna was happy, but she was sure it wouldn't happen. And the next morning the 2 women went outside, and Donna began to teach her cousin how to walk outside on her own. Their yard had a fence, so Donna was not afraid that Kate would go somewhere far away and get lost. For several days they spent mornings through evenings walking together, with Kate learning to determine possible routes by counting steps from Donna's chosen paths. She also learned to use the curbs for guidance. It was challenging, yet thrilling. Donna taught Kate the locations of several benches. By the end of the week, Kate could find them on her own. A triumphant achievement. Saturday night, after exchanging good-night wishes, they had dispersed to their bedrooms, when Kate looked back and asked, "Sorry to bother you, I just wanted to tell you, Donna, I don't know how to express my gratitude. You've done so much for me that I'll never be able to thank you enough. You're my saviour. I'm so grateful for your help. You have brought me back to life in these 3 weeks. I can do so many things now. They may seem like simple things, but they're so important to me. I mean, I want to keep going outside. I love walking, breathing the fresh air. Forgive me for ever doubting you." Donna was moved to tears. Her cousin's words were so heartfelt that it was impossible to remain untouched. She hugged Kate and whispered in her ear, "We'll continue. Do more. I'll teach you everything, and then I'll let you go free swimming." Kate decided not to ask what those words meant. She chose to leave that for later. 3 months passed. Kate went out alone every day, but not too far. A couple of times per week, she would go out in the evenings with Donna, who didn't even hold Kate's hand, just walked beside her, occasionally guiding her in the right direction. One day, a significant mishap occurred. Kate was descending the stairs for a walk outside. As she approached the last step, her foot hit a pebble that instantly skittered away. She lost her balance and fell onto her back. The moment her head forcibly struck the pavement, she thought she saw a blue flash before her eyes, like the sky. Then it vanished, and Kate
lost consciousness. She regained consciousness in the hospital, immediately recognizing the familiar scent of disinfectants. Someone was holding her hand. Kate tried to turn her head, but her neck wouldn't move. She panicked at the thought of being paralyzed from the fall. Was she not only blind, but now also immobile? She refused to accept this possibility. This felt like a nightmare. "What's wrong with her? Her breathing is odd," Kate heard Donna's voice. "I think she's panicking. We'll give her a sedative now," a male's voice she didn't recognize said. No, I don't need a sedative, please, no injection. First, tell me how serious this is. I'll never walk again, will I? Just don't lie to me." "What are you thinking, Kate? Have you lost your mind? Doctor, is she all right?" Donna sounded alarmed. "Oh, yes, she's fine. She just thinks she's paralyzed. Isn't that right, Kate? I'm telling you, don't worry. Everything is fine." The doctor's voice was extraordinary, as if it was wrapped in a mist of warm dewdrops. They seemed to leave traces on her skin, giving her goosebumps. "Kate, my name is Ben Connerty. I'm your doctor. You're not paralyzed. You had a hard bump and strained your neck. We decided to secure your neck as a precaution. You're wearing a special brace that restricts your head movement. You can move your arms and legs if you don't believe me." Indeed, Kate found she could move all her limbs. She sighed in relief. That was all she needed. "Oh my gosh, thank you. I thought I was done for. When I noticed that blue flash in my eyes as I fell, I thought I'd never get up again. It was terrifying, I tell you." Then Dr. Connerty asked Donna in a worried tone, "You said she was completely blind, isn't that right?" Kate answered in place of Donna, "Yes, I am completely blind. A serious accident has left me unable to see." Dr. Connerty took her hand, and Kate felt a rush of goosebumps from his touch. "Kate, what did the doctors say? You've visited doctors, haven't you? Can you share what anyone who examined you said?" "All I remember is one professor and some hospital doctors. They all said the same thing. I'll never see again. No one has examined me." Dr. Connerty responded passionately, "If you don't mind, I'd like to run some tests. It's not just about your eyesight. I'm also concerned about your neck, your spine. I want to add something. If your blindness were permanent, you wouldn't have seen the blue flash you mentioned. Your vision loss might not be related to the head injury, but could be due to an entirely different cause. I want to see for myself, if you'll allow me." Kate agreed. Within a month, Dr. Connerty performed numerous examinations, not just on her eyesight, but also her skeletal and muscular system. Although she had been discharged, Donna brought her in for ongoing checkups and consultations. She was examined by several neurologists, a psychiatrist, and neurosurgeon. After all these examinations, Dr. Connerty gave his verdict. "Kate, I can confidently assert that there's an extremely high probability your vision can be restored. Our examination revealed that a pinched nerve is causing your vision problems. One surgery could very likely restore your sight." Upon hearing this, Kate cried. Dr. Connerty took her hand, and again goosebumps ran along her skin. Why did his touch have such an effect on her? Kate quickly calmed down, because the doctor's voice enveloped her from all sides, making her feel safe. Dr. Connerty spent a long time persuading her to consider the surgery, emphasizing that she had nothing to lose. Over the course of a month, they conducted thorough examinations and analyses of her case. Dr. Connerty conversed extensively with Kate, compiling a comprehensive medical history. Caught up in the process, Dr. Connerty found himself developing feelings for Kate. She was more than just a patient to him. This lively, vibrant, and emotional woman stirred within him feelings he thought were long buried. But above all, he was determined to help her regain her sight and resume a normal life. Eventually, Kate agreed to the operation,
and the operation was scheduled in 3 days. They sat in his office discussing the final preparations. Kate was to be admitted to the hospital the following day. When Dr. Connerty got up to walk her to the door, Kate suddenly put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Can I do something? I've always been curious about this. When I've seen it in movies, I want to understand what blind people experience when they do this. May I?" Dr. Connerty didn't understand what she was referring to, but he agreed without hesitation. Kate reached out and traced her fingers across his face. She delicately explored his forehead, eyebrows, eyes, cheeks, lips, and chin. Then she ran her hand through his hair and smiled. Usually after something like this, people say, "You're handsome," or "I know what you look like." But alas, I didn't discover anything. I just know you have very smooth skin and no beard. Thank you, and excuse me. Dr. Connerty smiled and said quietly, "I'm sure you can still get a good look at me. I hope you don't say that I'm ugly, and you don't like me at all." "No, I won't say that." "No, I won't say that. If I regain my sight, I'll thank you for giving me a second chance at life. You will be there during the operation, won't you?" "Of course, I'll be there." 3 days later, Kate was wheeled into the operating room. She was very nervous and tried to stay calm, but it was difficult. She hardly held back her tears. Before entering the operating room, Dr. Connerty took her hand, leaned in and quietly said, "I wanted to say this after the operation, but I can't hold back. I usually don't have any relationship with my patients, but soon you won't be my patient. Once this is all over, would you have dinner with me?" Kate giggled nervously. "I can't promise. I need to look at you first. What if you're not so handsome as Dr. House?" Dr. Connerty laughed and let go of her hand. Inside the operating room, Kate wished she had said something different. She was too scared to admit that she would be happy to have dinner with him, even if she never regained her sight. Kate awoke with a severe headache and groaned. Immediately a nurse approached her. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" she asked. "My head hurts," Kate murmured. The nurse promptly administered an injection, and within 15 minutes, the headache had subsided. Kate, weak and anxious from the anesthesia, couldn't move. She was left wondering about her fate as a bandage covered her eyes, soon to be removed. The anticipation was terrifying. 2 hours later, the medical staff gathered around her. The nurse gently lifted the bandage from Kate's eyes. "You can open your eyes now, but do it slowly," urged Dr. Connerty. Kate opened her eyes. Miraculously, she could see again. The dimmed light was slightly uncomfortable, but she was able to see it. Overwhelmed with emotion, she started to look around, blinking and squinting constantly. "My goodness, I can see," she murmured. A doctor examined her briefly and declared that she was out of danger and would be fine. He said something else, but she didn't catch it. A single thought pulsed in her mind. She could see again. She was no longer blind. Fearfully, Kate closed her eyes. Then she felt someone take her hand. Recognizing the touch was Dr. Connerty's from the goosebumps on her skin, she slowly opened her eyes. She looked at the man who had saved her, and the pounding of her heart quickened. She recognized him from her dreams. He was the same man who had reached out to her in her dreams when she opened the door in the dark room. "Hello," Dr. Connerty greeted, smiling at her. Kate tightened her grip on his hand. "Hi," she responded, smiling back. "So, how are you feeling?" A tear trickled down her cheek. "Great! It couldn't be better. I feel like I've been reborn. So, when's dinner?" she asked.
Dr. Connaty feigned a frown. We have plenty of time for that. You're still my patient. Let's not discuss it now. A year had passed since the operation. Kate and Ben Connaty had been living together for a long time, and true love blossomed between them. Kate was in good health, her eyesight fully restored. However, she remained officially married to Damien, which clouded her happiness. Despite his lack of contact over the past year, she finally decided to visit him to resolve their situation. Returning to her hometown after more than a year, Kate felt neither trepidation nor regret. She had made the right choice to leave, having found true happiness and love. On her way to the high-rise building where she once lived with Damien, she felt a twinge of anxiety. How would he react to her recovery? Would he be pleased or saddened? Regardless, her feelings were unaffected. After paying the cab driver, she stood for a few moments before slowly heading towards the entrance. As she ascended the steps, her skin prickled with goosebumps. She paused, turned, and gazed at the cars parked in front of the driveway. Her gaze settled on a yellow Jaguar. A throbbing sensation filled her head as she recognized the car. She had seen it before, but where? She felt strange, like she was missing something important, like she was missing some detail. Suddenly, it hit her. That was the car that had struck her on the deserted street. Unbelievable. Oh my God. Is it really that car? Kate turned pale, her palms damp with sweat. She had hoped to escape her past, but instead, it seemed to be haunting her. Kate retreated, then turned abruptly and climbed the stairs, trying to clear her mind. The thought of that woman being nearby was too much. She needed to reach her and Damien's home immediately, settle everything, and then escape to Ben. When Damien opened the door, he was taken aback. He hadn't expected to see his wife on the doorstep. Kate looked at him and said, "Well, hello, my dear hubby. Surprised?" "Kate? How? Your sight has returned? How is that possible?" Damien was shocked. Kate simply grinned. "Anything is possible. You just didn't believe it. Honestly, I didn't either until I met people who made me believe. They helped me, and voila! Now you are going to let me into our apartment, or should I bring a lawyer?" "A lawyer? Why would you need a lawyer?" Pushing past him, Kate entered the apartment. Immediately she noticed signs of another woman's presence. Shoes, cosmetics in the hallway, a purse, perfume. The new woman had already made herself at home. Damien hadn't wasted any time. Kate wondered if this was the same woman he had cheated on her with, or a new one. "I see you're doing well. Sorry to disrupt your idyllic life, but I came to tell you I'm filing for divorce." Damien turned pale, his gaze drifting towards the bedroom. Fear flickered in his eyes. It dawned on Kate that his mistress was here too. Well, she thought, it was time to meet her. "Honey, who's there? Is it the grocery delivery?" A voice echoed from the bedroom. Kate frowned. His mistress had a grating voice, similar to a creaking floorboard. She raised an eyebrow and whispered to Damien, "Why haven't you introduced us? Does she know about me? Or did you tell her I was dead? Have you lied to her, that we've been divorced for ages?" A woman in a negligee then appeared in the hallway. She was a petite, red-haired woman. Kate began to study the woman. She felt like she had seen her before, but couldn't recall where they had crossed paths. She scrutinized the woman's face, who, in response, crossed her arms and glared back defiantly. "Who the hell are you? Clearly not a courier," she spat in her grating voice. "And you're clearly not the housekeeper. I'm Damien's wife, and you're his mistress." The woman turned to Damien. "Darling, you told me she was blind. Have you been lying to me?" "Wendy, I haven't deceived you. She was indeed blind. I can't comprehend what's happening, I swear. Wendy, I had nothing to do with it." Kate looked at them both and smirked. Damien was grovelling before his Wendy. They were a perfect match.
I don't know why you're here, but you don't belong here. You're no longer Damien's wife, right? You left him. I'm in charge now.
The woman sneered at her, but Kate wasn't fazed. No, I'm still the owner here, even if it's only half. I'm here to fix it. Damien, I'm filing for divorce, and we're splitting this place in half. I think that's all I needed to say. Kate turned and walked towards the door. Her gaze fell on a table near the hallway. On it was a bright yellow key fob with a Jaguar badge. Goosebumps ran down her spine. She suddenly realized something. She turned to the woman and asked, "Is that your car in the driveway, the yellow Jaguar?" Wendy grinned and replied,
"Yes, it is. Why do you ask? Are you envious? You won't find another like it. It's a custom paint job."
Then it hit Kate. She knew this woman. She was the one who had hit her with her car and fled the scene. She was the one who caused her loss of sight. "So, you're the one who hit me. You're the person who left me unconscious on the road." Wendy turned pale and covered her mouth with her hand. Damien, completely confused, shifted his gaze from one woman to the other. "Wendy, what is she talking about? What does all this mean? Were you the one who hit her? I don't understand what you mean," he asked.
"I never ran anyone over. None of this is true,"
Wendy responded to Kate. "No, it was you. I saw you then and your hair and the sticker on the window. I remember everything. I remember you now with your red hair. I'll never forget it. You're so disgusting. You'll answer for everything in court. I'll make sure you pay for all my suffering," Kate exclaimed. Wendy sobbed. Her courage suddenly left her and she began to look very strange. Her eyes bulged out in fear and her face was as flaming as her hair. She didn't know what to say. "You'll pay for everything you've done, both of you," Kate said and walked out of the apartment. Kate divorced Damien. She decided not to sue Wendy. Damien pleaded with her not to, promising to give up his rightful half of the apartment in return. Kate realized that Damien was willing to do anything for his mistress. He didn't care that Wendy was the cause of their breakup. Kate, content with her present life, had no intention of revisiting the painful past. She had sole ownership of the apartment after her divorce, and had no idea about the whereabouts of her ex-husband or the woman who caused her blindness. She was determined to erase them from her memory forever. After pricing the apartment reasonably for a quick sale, she promptly sold it. With the money from the sale, she immediately returned to Ben. As she rode the train, she couldn't help but smile. She planned to give the remaining money from the sale of her parents' apartment to Donna, as a token of gratitude. Donna had been instrumental in helping Kate start anew. Even though Kate anticipated Donna would refuse the money, she was resolved to find a way. The proceeds from the sale of the apartment with Damien would remain in her bank account for now. Kate was excited about her upcoming marriage to Ben and looked forward to the birth of their child, who she was already carrying. As she gently stroked her belly, her smile broadened. All her dreams were coming true, one after another, and this was just the beginning.